Sitting on the chair, he was thinking about something of his own, and only the echoes of his name, Yu Dam-dok, made him come back to reality. The men sitting in front of him asked questions, and the next one was how he would clean the polluted water. Without hesitation, he replied that he would use a special machine from the government. They looked at him and started looking for the next question to ask. One of them was interested in what exactly made him turn to them. As soon as he opened his mouth and tried to say something, the man interrupted and added that if you look at his resume, he had no talents. So he asked for an honest answer whether he thought this conversation was pointless. Yu Dam-dok was a little cornered by this open question, but he asked again to make sure he heard correctly. And quite openly, he replied that why would he take a job in such a large corporation if he had no talents? He clenched his fist and said that why did they post a job ad and that they were prompted to do so by the law on discrimination against talentless people. Yu Dam-dok wondered what was with all the damn talk about talent again after the existence of the underground was revealed. People began to develop new abilities and were called talents, and civilization began to develop rapidly. Some people considered talent a blessing, and even he thought so until he learned that he had no talent. Another man joined him and said that their company was working for profit and did not hire talentless people like him. To defend myself, I asked him if he even realized what he had just said, because it was direct discrimination against people without talent. At first, he didn't understand, but once he realized what he had just been told, he couldn't let this happen to him. They all started to quarrel about what he thought and how he behaved, and they were sick of people like him because his lack of talent did not make him a superhero. All this time, Yu Dam-dok sat and waited for them to stop talking, and as soon as they did, he asked them to apologize to him for their attitude. They only laughed because they thought that it should be the other way around, that the one who wasted their time should apologize. Then he stood up and said that judging by their reaction, they would not apologize. But the man said that only after him. Standing in front of them, he reached into his pocket to take out a notebook, and as soon as they saw it, they were very frightened. And to scare them even more, he added that it was definitely a discriminatory statement against talentless people. They ran out of their seats to catch up with him and shouted after him, apologizing and asking him to wait. Just before leaving, he stopped and turned around and said that he would see how they could repeat these words in front of the Human Rights Commission. When he left home, he was very annoyed because he had no talent, not pride. I laughed at the idea that talent is a blessing to humanity, but then I thought to hell with it and felt that I had become something. I saw that it was chewing gum and almost exploded with anger because it was firmly stuck to my shoe. Trying to tear it off, he shouted that it was not so hard after he chewed it to throw it in the trash. Suddenly, a strong stream of cold water hit him directly in the face from the bushes. The workers who were watering the bushes did not notice that a person was there and apologized. When I came to the front door of the house, I wondered what was wrong with this day, why I was so unlucky. Since I lived on the lower floor, I went to the window and saw that the drunken fools had done their thing again. After he finished cleaning, his mother called and asked how things were at work, and he tried to change the subject by asking how she was doing in the hospital. But my mother suddenly reminded me of my uncle's debt, and in order not to listen to it for the 1000th time, I interrupted her and shouted out my opinion that my uncle was most likely in another country. When he realized that he had cut a little, he said that he was not angry with his mother and apologized for shouting. He also asked me not to worry because he had a good education and a good resume, so I shouldn't worry about money and think about how to get better. As soon as the conversation quieted down, my mom asked how he was doing, and they talked, and Dam-dok promised to call her again later. It was a really hard day, and a conversation with my mom made me go outside. Trying to get a cigarette, he mumbled that it was the only thing that made him feel any better. As soon as the rain came down and wet the lighter, I froze in place, standing for a minute without moving, not even a thought. The lighter he was holding hit the asphalt with such force that it bounced off him several times. He looked up at the sky and shouted if he could at least give him a smoke because he was already doing his best. He got even angrier and asked why he hated him so much and what he wanted from him. When he fell to the ground, he thought that it didn't matter whether he existed or not, someone had to take responsibility for it, but he was still very angry with God. Suddenly the sky began to shine with lightning, which immediately caught his attention, and thunder rolled very loudly across the sky. Yu Dam-dok took this as a sign that he had heard him, and thus showed him how much anger he was feeling. After he called out and sent God, in a second a lightning bolt struck him from the sky. While still conscious, when I was falling to the ground, I thought that I should have expected this to happen. Already lying on the ground, the last thing that came to mind was how his mother would be without him. and he lost consciousness. After a while, he opened his eyes and saw something glowing bright blue above him. The first thing that came to mind was why he was still alive, and the second was what was hanging in the sky above him. I saw that it said that a job was available, and below it was barely visible that the gods were waiting for him. All the time after the incident, I sat under the window and thought about what it was and how I survived. Because after shouting at the god, whose existence he had never denied but never accepted, lightning struck, and it was not the punishment of heaven. When people are struck by lightning, they usually do not survive. But after examining myself well, I saw that there was not even a scratch on my body. And if I remember right away, I saw a flying message above my head with a writing for some work, but it was so unclear what it was. It resembled a status window that people with talent see. The thought flashed that maybe the lightning was a talent, and to check it out, I needed to open that window. As soon as it appeared, I immediately confirmed my guesses, but it was not clear why it was writing about some kind of part-time job. Then a globe and various windows with such inscriptions appeared all over the room. It was a real advertisement for a part-time job. It made him laugh, because in his life all he could count on was a part-time job, and even here everything was repeating itself. Gathering my strength, I set myself up with negative thoughts because I still had nothing to lose. Returning to the status window, I made a request for the work and saw that even there, it was divided into categories. After selecting one of the works, a warning popped up that it lacked divine powers. I didn't know what those powers were either, but I just grumbled that they had never existed and that I had no talent. I noticed that it didn't look dangerous, so who knows? Maybe his choice will be a turning point in his life. At first glance, the divine part-time job looked like a job search program, but when I clicked on one of them, I saw that no divine power was needed. The screen showed that I needed to create a dungeon in Midgard, and this option was interesting. But he paused for a second because it said dungeons, and as far as he knew, different monsters lived in them. There were plenty of questions about what kind of work it was, and whether it meant that the dungeons were created by gods. Then, looking at the amount of money he would receive, he saw that it was 12 tours, and wondered what kind of currency it was, and whether it could be exchanged for real money. Since it was the money of the gods, it had to be worth a lot, and it was better to try to think endlessly. Somewhere in an unknown world, a pillar of energy appeared from nowhere, coming from the sky to the earth. That energy hit the tree and split it into two parts with its force. Doc came out of that tree all torn up in a state of shock that this had happened to him after clicking yes. Looking around, he saw the incredible beauty of nature and a place he had never been before. While he was looking around and thinking that it was just a dream, a creature crept up behind him and rushed at him. Before she could get there, a huge man appeared and caught her and asked her to be obedient. When he turned his gaze to him, it was not the new worker who spoke, but the fright on Doc's face. The burly man introduced himself as Thor, the Norse god of thunder, and said he was pleased to meet him. He smiled sincerely and took him by the shoulder, sure that he already knew him. Picking him up by his shirt, he said that he would tell me everything on the way, and I noticed that he was very light, but I hoped he was strong. His massive body with a long beard and incredibly strong gaze made one believe that he was Thor, and in his hands he could be seen carrying a large, heavy hammer with sparks on it. It must have been Mjolnir. He turned around and asked me that, judging by his appearance, he looked like a god from Asia. This question was very strange, whether it was normal that he called him God, but the answer had to be given. I also had to figure out which god, since I knew a couple of them. He needed to be called someone who would not arouse suspicion, since he was sure that he was the only person here. Then he smiled and answered the Torah that yes, he was from Asia, but he was not famous because he was from a small mountain. He slapped me on the back and laughed, saying that he had heard of him and knew that he helped people in danger. Even the Thunder God thought he was too immersed in human culture, and Doc replied that he had descended into the human world many times. Thor concluded that the man must value people, so he asked if he was sure he could do it. To make a place where people will suffer turned to him and smiled lightly. Being afraid for his life, he did not think for a long time and answered immediately that of course he could, but sweat appeared on his cheeks. As soon as they arrived at a certain place and started to climb the stairs, Thor asked him if he had heard of the Minotaur's Labyrinth. If you have heard of it, then he simply pointed to what is being built and added that this will be the concept of this dungeon, and his task is to help build the maze together with them. To put it mildly, Doc was quite shocked by this scenario, A little later, while working, he stopped because he was surprised by something on his backside and was called and told that there was no time to move on. He was struck by the huge door of one of the rooms with a bull's head at the very top. After some more time, I came to the surface as I needed to eat and rest a bit. When I was eating, I heard an announcement that help was needed in Sector E1 and shouted that I would go. But they didn't hear him and wanted to shout again, but he didn't let them, appearing suddenly in front of the man, which frightened him. The man noticed that he was a very hard worker and asked him to be careful not to fall into a manhole or pit. In the dungeon, the Red Goblin told him that it should work, so that's enough. I praised him for his good work and asked him how he felt about Udam-dok, and he smiled and said that he was replacing sports. Since everything was ready, the goblin told him to go to the cart and make a short break there, and then they would go to the next place. As we were leaving, I asked him if all Asian gods were so proactive, and his answer was that it depended on their character. Goblin also noticed that a lot of people who worked with him responded very well. He thought that he was Udam-dok, who had 200% social skills, and the talent who needed it was to communicate with the gods. The cart stopped, and the goblin stood up and showed them to follow him, because they needed to move on by themselves. Their traps will be blown if this giant passes through here. Taking the box, he stepped aside, and the goblin shouted at him to be careful and watch where he was going. He pointed to the floor and asked if he saw a trap sign, and if so, not to step on it. So that he would not get caught again, he showed him where the others were, that this was the first time he had seen them, and now he would know how to see them in the future. As they went, he said that the older gods needed people to test them, and that gods like them had no place among them, so they earned their living by doing this work. Dungeons must be built constantly, which means endless work on them. Then he pointed to the workers and suggested that we go look at the room they had started building a few minutes ago, and that it was probably already finished. The size of the room was impressive, and even more impressive was how they were able to do it in a few minutes. It made me wonder how they did it and what kind of picks they had. Then the goblin ordered me to put a box over there and approach him. He was opening them at the time and saying that these things should make this place a good test. Damdok put his hand up and said it looked like a round stone, and the goblin said that in a year it would make spiders. And when they emerge from all these eggs, this dungeon will be a pain in the ass. There was another box on the side, but this one was bigger, and he asked what kind of monster it was. In the box was a human lizard tied up with bandages, and quite tall with a muscular body. I thought it was incredible and wondered why the part around the neck was transparent. The goblin shouted to him to be careful because the lizard had not yet completed its shell, and this was a vital place, and let him lie there because it was time for them to move on. Then they got to the goblin's hideout, and the arrival of people in this place meant that they were almost at the boss. He stopped and noticed that in one of the caches, he could see the silhouette of one of the goblins. He opened his eyes sharply, jumped up, and shouted at the top of his voice that Udam-dok's eyes nearly popped out of his head. He fell on his ass, unable to comprehend what was happening, while the goblin could not stop laughing. His friend, who could hardly contain his laughter, told him not to worry, the goblin was just joking. But it will be a completely different story when the dungeon is built, because these creatures are smart and cunning, so they are difficult to counteract. Walking a little further, Udam-dok saw that amazing door again. It was the end of the maze. The head on top was huge, and the drawings on the door indicated that the boss was behind it. At that moment, the god Thor came up to them, cheerful as always, and greeted them kindly. He also said that he had heard a lot of good compliments about him and asked how the work was going, and he replied that it was going well thanks to everyone's work. Thor was satisfied with this answer, and the next thing he wanted to know was whether they had finished placing the monsters. The goblin reported on the work done, saying that it was done and they only had a little more to do. Thor took this well and realized that the god of the mountains could be sent home and raised the hammer up. He praised him for his good work, laughed, and shouted that the next dungeon would be in Asian style. There was thunder, and the hammer in Thor's hand came sharply down upon him. The energy was raging over his head, so he fell to the ground in fright and held his head with his hands. He let out a sigh of relief, thinking, who could tolerate people like that? He had already thought that he was being punished for lying and pretending to be a god. I also rejoiced in the thought that it was real, not a dream or a stupid hallucination, but a real reality. With this joy, he jumped to his knees and raised one fist in the air, glad to have finally gained talent. The system interrupted him, telling him that he had been paid his salary and whether he wanted to see it. As soon as I clicked it, I was notified to wait a bit as the god's bench was loading. Various objects began to be knocked out. First of all, the spear of the almighty god Odin Gungnir, which had the property of never missing. The second thing that caught my eye was the armor of the Nemean lion, which neutralized all physical damage. There was also an interesting necklace of Freya that helped to travel through different dimensions. Judging by the items there, Doc realized that it was a store for the gods. In it, one could even acquire a power like Thor's lightning, or the power of the most famous blacksmith of mythology, Hephaestus the Flame. There was also the power of the god of battles, Ares, called Destruction. I immediately thought that if he could buy it all, he would become a god in human form, the god Doc. Clenching his fist, he firmly decided that his life would change with the arrival of this moment. And he immediately realized that he didn't have enough money on his balance sheet. I thought that, of course, the cheapest one was 70,000 Tors, which was very expensive. Then he started flipping through to see what he could buy with his paycheck. When I found the talent graph and clicked on it, I almost fainted from surprise. They were selling talent, and all he had to do was buy it at a damn good price for someone like him. What was even more important was the price of them. As soon as I saw that they cost 12 Tors, my eyes went to my forehead. In the explanation to them, it was written that the gods do not need talents if they are used by mortals. They need strength, not talent. And what else was driving me crazy was that these were not ordinary talents, but SS-class talents. The first talent I chose to watch was the SS-class sword talent. If you think about it, he really liked swords when he was a kid. With nothing else to think about, I let off steam and pressed the receive button. It was as if my body rose up a little, and a golden glow shone around me. I was very pleased with the result, because I have always done a lot to get F-class talent, and did not expect to get it so easily. The system congratulated him on his first purchase, and that today was a special day. So they give him another item of the same class as the one he just bought. It was incredible, and I immediately started looking for something to buy next and chose combat talent. I was as happy as a little child, because I could use both of them. But something started to happen. I got dizzy, looked at my hand, and saw that my eyes were blurry. Only when I fell to the floor did I feel the pain go all over my body until the system notified me. What is happening is that the body is being strengthened to prepare for talents. Lung capacity is increasing and muscles are growing. After he lost consciousness, he dreamt that his mother was approaching him and apologizing for being so bad to him because she was suffering so much. He told her threateningly that he had asked her not to say that, and that everything was fine now, and that he had talent. As soon as he stood up, he grabbed his head and said that he was dreaming about his mother, and he caught himself thinking that he had woken up abruptly and that it had all been a dream. Without hesitation, I shouted out for a status window to appear to convince him. It said that his profession was a low-class god and that all the talents he had acquired were there. He sat back down on the floor and smiled, because life is really not fair and not expected for someone as talentless as he was. Suddenly the phone rang and he saw that his mother was trying to call him. As soon as he picked up the phone and wanted to brag, she told him not to come to the hospital today. He asked her if something was wrong, but she just wanted him to listen and not come to the hospital. He was confused by this and tried to ask what had happened. Then another voice on the phone asked if it was Cho Yun-hee's guardian, and he answered that it was. Then he said that he could not give details, but a dungeon appeared next to the hospital. They called earlier, but no one answered the phone until the situation improves. But Doc had no desire to sit idly by at home, especially when it came to his mother's safety. The place where the dungeon appeared was surrounded by heavily armed soldiers. The news even reported that there were government representatives at every step. A man shouted into a gramophone that this was a restricted area and asked everyone to move away. A taxi quickly brought Doc to the scene. As soon as I paid and left the car, I looked at the man and the system informed me that the combat focus skill had been activated. Then I could see that person very close, but I didn't understand why everything happened automatically. Then I noticed that I heard people saying that the government was rounding up all the hunters in the country. They were discussing whether the hunter with 8 stars would come, because it was a very dangerous dungeon. Everyone around him was talking about something, and he heard them all very well and clearly. I could not believe that it was all because of the skills of the talents I had acquired earlier. Pulling himself together, he thought that now was not the time to think about it. He needed to get to the hospital somehow. When he got through the crowd, he shouted that his mother was there, but the soldier refused to let him in because there was a labyrinth in the dungeon. When I heard this, I could not believe what it all meant and why he called it a labyrinth. People around me began to run away in panic from the stream of energy that exploded in the back. Yu Damdok did not intend to run away like everyone else, so he covered himself with his hands to protect himself from the wave of the explosion. He was still thrown back as soon as he woke up and began to barely get to his feet. Wiping off the dust, I asked myself what was going on here. As soon as I looked up and took a good look after the dust settled, I saw the impossible. He could see the very dungeon he helped build. The attention was turned to a man who was coughing and clearly needed help. Throwing him over my shoulder, I asked if he was okay, and the man asked only to get out of there as soon as possible. Suddenly, his instincts kicked in, and he pushed the man to one side and fell to the other, and something quickly flew between them. When he fell, he looked around and saw a real sword stuck in the car. Turning his head in the other direction, he saw a man with a sword sticking out of his hand, and the man told him in a hoarse voice to run away as fast as he could. As soon as the man fell on his backside, he had the physique of the same man of the lizard from the box. The lizard was serious, and when it saw its next victim, it was ready to attack immediately. The military, who arrived in time, began shooting at them to prevent more casualties. They had quite strong skin, but when the bullets hit the monster's bottoms, they immediately fell. Yu Damdok was shocked the whole time, hiding behind a car and shouting that there were people here. He was quickly brought to his senses by another lizard that appeared in front of him and charged. To facilitate her task, she threw her sword at him, which flew very fast. The system reported the activation of the combat focus, and everything around suddenly became very slow. So much so that when the sword came close to him, he was able to raise his hand up and catch it. As soon as I threw the sword aside, I was dumbfounded by my skill and looked at my hand in disbelief that I had done it. The second lizard turned his attention to himself, swinging to throw at the man next to him. You send everything to hell and gather all your courage into a fist and bend down on the monster. The soldiers immediately stopped shooting when they saw him there, but it was not clear whether he was a hunter or a simple man. Even if he was a hunter, why was he unarmed and Yu Damdok himself was surrounded by them? My body was shaking with fear, but my thoughts were that I rushed here out of anger, but I did not know what to do next. The lizards were not going to spare him. One of them decided to attack first, and did not listen to his cries that he did not want to. The sword passed a few centimeters away again, the combat focus skill activated in time. To him, the skill of combat focus was like feeling as if he had drunk many mugs of coffee before a fight. And since I could clearly see their movements, I could try to counterattack these creatures. The talent of combat power became an active strike on the lizard, hitting it so hard that it flew away like a feather. When I looked up, I could not believe that he had managed to do it, and it also meant that his talents were working. Since we managed to defeat one, we had to deal with two more. When the first lizard tried to attack, he sharply ducked down and brought his body forward. This allowed me to turn around and hit the monster right in the head with a strong kick. There was one more who was running, because he thought he would not see him coming. The lizard, having come very close, was already watching how his blow would bring him victory. To save himself from the attack, he decided to jump up to the mountain at the moment when he was pointing his sword. It worked, and the creature lost its vigilance and got a right kick in the head. The soldiers looked at him and could not believe their eyes that this was possible. For such an unremarkable guy to be able to kill lizards without weapons with his bare hands. Damdok's attention was drawn to a man who appeared there. He asked which guild he was from and praised him, despite the fact that he was a newcomer and very good. He came up and shook hands, introduced himself as the head of the Sangun Guild, named Namgun Duke. He was curious because usually guilds send several people, but here Yu Damdok said that he was working alone. The head said that they came here to clear the dungeon and offered to go with them. He was surprised by this, but abruptly remembered that he was no longer an ordinary man and the monsters were coming fast. And if they don't stop them, a lot of people may suffer, so I agreed to the proposal. As soon as they entered, I tried to walk in front to be able to guide them. Walking a little further, I noticed that one of the group was making crosses just in case. He asked everyone to stop and said that from now on he would lead them himself. People didn't like it. One man angrily asked to listen to him. He didn't know where he came from, but here they only listened to their elders. Yu Damdok did not go for the provocation and explained why he said so, because then the pits and traps began. Namgun Dok laughed and thanked them for their help, but their squad had already found their way. In order not to start an argument, he knelt down and picked up a stone and threw it into one of the traps. As soon as the stone touched the ground, the trap was triggered. Razor-sharp pins emerged from the ground and smashed the stone. He reassured the chairman that his squad had definitely not passed through here. He pointed his finger at the floor and said that this trap was activated by touch, and the spears are made of a special alloy, which means they can pierce any armor. Namgundok asked how he knew all this, and then he mentioned that he could not tell them that he helped build this dungeon. To ward off suspicion, he decided to joke about it, calling it his trade secret and suggesting that we move on. Recalling that he had taken a torch just in case, he emphasized to everyone that it would be more dangerous. He raised a fire above him to illuminate what awaited them. A giant spider was depicted on the door in front of them. As soon as we went inside and moved on through the room, we encountered only small spiders that could easily be crushed by a foot. While one complained that his leg was covered in spider blood, the other was afraid that they would turn into a barbecue. He asked him what he was doing while they were discussing the plan. These spiders are everywhere, just like their webs that serve as a trap. They talked about what the guy had said, and they couldn't trust him because he could be a spy. When he reached the end of the corridor, he looked in and saw the room where he had placed it. He has a huge number of traps with spider eggs and knows where they all hide. In order not to cause big problems, he decided that he would set them all on fire and finally get a reward for his work. The combat power was activated because I heard someone calling for help, and I managed to stop the others from burning everything to find out who was shouting. After a while, the head of the building told his subjects that people were found inside and that they needed to save them first. When they get inside, they have to form a combat formation because they don't know what is happening to the people there, so they have to move unexpectedly. He also emphasized that he does not know what skills the guy uses, but he sees that he knows these places, so the rescue team will obey his orders. Udamdok did not expect to be in charge at all, as he had no such experience before. He wanted to tell him this because he was worried about endangering people on his own account. But at this time, a girl came up behind him and said that he should be thanked for passing the area with traps without any obstacles. After shaking hands, I wanted to admit to her that I had no experience, but she was the first to speak and asked him not to worry. He just needed to guide them. Since they were holding hands the whole time, he asked her to let him go, and she asked why he didn't use a weapon. Before she left, she emphasized that it was obvious that he had not used it and recommended that he should start carrying a sword or two. If that's all, she goes and adjusts her hood, looks at him again, and leaves. This girl was very curious. She said everything that was on her mind and left, and I wondered if he had told anyone his name. The chairman asked everyone to take their positions according to the plan, and they will enter. They went inside and started looking around, and one of them noticed that it was very quiet. The chairman ordered them to keep quiet and look at each other intently. Udamdok abruptly stopped. He raised his head up and shouted that the danger was over their heads. The spiders that were there were different from the ones in front of the entrance. They were huge. Namgundok grabbed an axe because those monsters started coming down from the top. He shouted at his subordinates to stop the panic and come out of their stupor and to follow the plan. While the rescue team had time to search for the people, Udamdok ordered them to follow him. In order to cope quickly, he activated his combat instincts to hear at least some sound from people. He was able to find them very quickly as he broke away in front and called the group and asked them to move faster. They brought them down from the top and tried to cut the cocoon with knives to save them. But as soon as they did, a group of monsters approached them from behind, unnoticed. Udamdok shouted to them that he knew a safe place and to follow him quickly. While I was dealing with the spiders, I thought about what I had initially doubted. In between thoughts, I used strong, quick blows to blow spiders left and right. He was worried that the boy knew how the dungeon was organized and where the people were, even though he had never seen it before. Along with the people who were rescued, there were also people who were already wounded, and they all had to be evacuated from the dungeon. One of the group members told the head that their total damage was minimal, and he was happy about that, so he and the others who were ready to fight would move on. He turned his head to Udamdok and said that he wanted to talk to him very much. Not counting the 2 policemen and the rest of the hunters, there are at least 10 more who have fallen into the traps, even people from their offensive unit. And if not for him, they would have burned them all, and he laughed and scratched the back of his head and said that it was nothing. The chairman added that he had a feeling that he had some incredible talent, as if he had built the dungeon himself. But he quickly tried to cut off the topic, joking that he was not a god to build it. He asked them to gather all their strength and continue on their way, and mentally, he was glad that he hadn't been caught. They came to a place with interesting paintings that looked like they were not paintings of ancient peoples. Udamdok said that it was built by goblins. The subordinates were upset that there were only goblins there, and they expected to reach the boss. He thought that there was a goblin ambush and could not come up with a reliable plan, but with the firepower, he could try something. Having made up his mind, he apologized to the chairman and asked if he could go on alone. One of the squad didn't like this, as he was very confident and interrupted the goblin's tone, so if he was scared, he asked them to stand aside. Namgundok and Udamdok stepped aside, the chairman not thinking that the idea of going alone was advisable. In this case, Damdok asked that once they were inside, they should listen to what he had to say, and they agreed. An upstart among the squad overheard their conversation and intended to use this chance to show off in front of the head. But because of this guy, the plan was ruined, and I could not let this chance be stolen completely after walking a few meters into a very spacious, bright room. The squad began to resent why the room was empty, where all the dum-dums were, and asked them to be quiet. Two members of the squad joked with him that if any goblins appeared, they would protect him. Suddenly, all the light disappeared around him, and he shouted at them not to turn on the lights. And the man asked why they should listen to him, because if they wanted to fight, they needed to turn on the lights, and if they were afraid of goblins, they should sit aside. After these words, his finger moved forward and the light from the lantern came on. Udamdok shouted to everyone to duck down immediately if they wanted to live. Those two were in the front, and the one in the back smiled and asked why he was standing there. They had to go on. And then he came back, and his body was full of arrows that pierced him without noise. His body collapsed to the ground as the lantern in his hands fell next to him, shining into the void. The chairman ordered everyone to stay still, turned around, and asked if that was why he asked them not to turn on the lights. But it was strange that they could hear them, so why didn't they attack? He said quietly that it was true and that they were playing with their loot. They are now watching them from the darkness because they want to enjoy their fear. Namgundoak still insisted that they could not attack in the dark, and then he heard an interesting option that they could do it without light. Udamdok activated his skill and asked him to just rely on it. While everyone was crouching down and sitting quietly on the floor, he walked a little in front to get used to the darkness. He realized that they were all excited and could not see anything, so he asked them not to move or make any sounds until he said so. As soon as I stood in the center of the room, I closed my eyes and tried to concentrate. He began to sense everything around him with the help of a combat sense, and he knew where the goblins were. Having tuned in, I opened my eyes and began to act without leaving them a chance. After a few minutes of ordering the lights to be turned on, they saw the bodies of the monsters lying around, and the last one was holding the one he was holding. As soon as that one was destroyed, we could not believe that this guy was capable of such a thing, and were very interested in what tricks he used. One of the two survivors was angry because if he had been given a little more time, all the laurels would have gone to him. The chairman was delighted. He had never seen anything like it in his entire life while hunting. Walking further, we finally came to the place where the head of a bull was on top of the door, which was the boss's room. The large doors of the room opened and let in rays of light. In front of them, at the top of the stairs where the throne was, sat a huge creature with the head of a bull. At first glance, the chairman realized that they were facing a real dungeon boss with incredible strength. Since he saw that the enemy was not going to attack first, he wanted to take advantage of this advantage. Udamdok received a message from the system that the Minotaur sacrifice was activated and needed to select 5 candidates. It was not clear what it was, but it seemed that only he could see this message. I thought that there must be at least some hint how to get through here without any problems. It would be nice to find information. He approached Namgundoak with a proposal, but he asked him to wait, and they were discussing a plan, and not wanting to wait, he said that he knew how to get around the boss. The chairman took this into account, and they stepped aside to discuss the details. The man from the squad was angry with the boy again because he had stolen his opportunity to show off. He could no longer stare at it stupidly, so he crept closer to the monster. Drawing the arrow of his crossbow, he smiled, saying that plans are for weaklings who are afraid of defeat. Pointing his crossbow at the Minotaur, he thought that now he would show everyone with just one shot. I just had to get even closer to shoot him in one of his eyes. Udamdok turned around and saw what he was doing and shouted at him to stop and freeze in place. But he shouted back at him that this time he would not allow all the glory to be taken for himself, so he would destroy the boss himself. With one step, the floor lit up in bright color, and a warning appeared that they had entered the boss's room, and the sacrifices for the offering will be selected automatically. The head shouted at his subordinate that he was a fool and hoped he realized what he had done. Dum-Dum shouted at them that this was not the time to settle the matter, as the Minotaur was already in front of them. The man who caused all this was sitting on the floor and could not even move out of fear. As soon as he came to, he started knocking on the barrier and tried to escape from there with all his might. The Minotaur saw him and moved quickly, but the head of the Minotaur rushed in time to save him. Then, when I enter the battle, I will shout to everyone to take their positions and stay calm and stick to the plan with all their might. While the Minotaur struck the axe in advance, the head dodged and used this chance to counterattack. He managed to kick the creature in the chest, which caused it to stagger and start falling. His subordinates were happy that their leader was doing well, and that even now they would not have to intervene in the battle. Even Dok was watching with delight. This shot showed that Namgunduk was on the second level. But when he tried to hit him in the chest with an axe, the blow simply stopped without causing any damage. He felt as if the axe had struck a piece of iron and not his skin. Because he was thinking, the Minotaur's blow almost hit him, passing by a few centimeters. But he noticed that the light sensation he felt after the blow caused heavy bleeding on his arm. Any careless blow or movement could have cost him his life. In order to find out at least some of the enemy's weaknesses, he ordered the soldiers to surround him and attack him cautiously. Dok appreciated how the chairman gave clear and thoughtful commands, which showed his experience. I was also interested in the Minotaur. It was strange that it did not approach the wounded, as if the distance was not important to it. I looked down and saw that electric discharges had reached the ground. As soon as the Minotaur picked up his axe, he immediately remembered how Thor picked up his hammer, so he did not expect any good from these actions. At that very moment, the team took this as a weakness, so they decided to attack in one fell swoop. As soon as Dok shouted it was too late, the chairman and his team could not stop. In order to save them, he decided to throw himself at the creature and kicked it in the head. This made the Minotaur even more angry, and you could see the aggression in his eyes. It became clear to him that his actions were also useless, and it was too late. There was a strong explosion of energy that scattered them to different sides of the room. The axe was on the floor from the impact. People were lying unconscious on their sides. Their heads were not making any movements. The team that was on the other side of the protective barrier could not get around it to help. Dok also tried to collect his thoughts. Because he had gone through this life and even received a talent, he could not leave his life so stupidly. When his hand touched something he didn't understand, he looked at it, and then an idea came to him. It was something he hadn't tried before, so he smiled and thought to himself that it was too early to say goodbye to life. The Minotaur saw that someone in the dust managed to get up after being hit by his energy. And Dok, having risen to his feet, activated his swordsman's talent and set himself up for victory. Namgunduka opened his eyes, saw that the guy wanted to start a fight, thought that he could not even scratch him. What would happen to the one who first took the sword in his hands? I had to scream to get out of there as soon as possible, but when I opened my mouth, I couldn't even make a sound. Meanwhile, the Minotaur reached for Dum Dum to grab him and destroy him. But he didn't succeed because he managed to step aside and suddenly break out in front, hitting one corner with his sword. At first, he thought that everything was like a game, and only now he began to realize that everything was real. And after he managed to avoid falling into the enemy's clutches and managed to cut off its horn, he realized that he could defeat the monster. Despite holding such a weapon for the first time, I already felt it as a part of me, but the enemy did not appreciate his skills. With such a massive body, the Minotaur was able to move very quickly, and he decided to use this speed to get it. As soon as I got to the shelter, I swung my fist and directed its power at him. My fist hit the ground, and a second later, many cuts appeared on my arm. The chairman was in shock and could not believe his eyes that he had seen 6 consecutive blows. He managed to recognize in the boy that he was not just a martial artist, but a master swordsman. But it was still not enough. The monster's skin was very strong. The man who started it was hysterical and shouted that they were fools who did not know what they were doing because they could not defeat such a creature. Namgunduk looked at his subordinate, but all his thoughts were on the boy, as his strikes could match the best techniques of the East. This suggested that the boy clearly had talent, but there was one problem. The sword would not last long, and Dum Dum also realized this. If it continues in this vein, it will definitely not survive. We had to look for a weak spot very quickly. As soon as he approached the Minotaur, he stopped in front of it to try to dodge the oncoming attack. By lifting one leg, he shifted the load to the other, which allowed the shot to pass by. Immediately after this happened, I swung and kneed the monster's body with all my might. While he was disoriented by such antics, he decided to use his fighting skills to kick the creature in the head. Everything led to the fact that we could try to finish him off with a single sword blow. But he came to his senses, saw the danger to himself, jerked his head forward and hit the ground with his forehead. This trick was unexpected and strong enough that Dok was thrown back. Looking at the sword, he realized that it was on the verge of being used up, so the next strike was his last chance. And if by some miracle I had acquired a new skill, I would definitely be fine. The Minotaur began to accumulate a powerful charge of energy around him again. The head saw it, because he knew that the monster wanted to use the same technique that had neutralized the entire team. But Dok was not going to back down. He took a stronger grip on his sword and was determined to stand his ground. A very large amount of energy has gathered near the Minotaur. Namgundok did not want to stand on the sidelines and went up to think about how he could help. He looked at his frightened subordinate and called him over. He said that he had something special hidden in his robe, so this was his chance to prove himself. At this time, Dok was setting himself up for a strike. His only chance was to punch through the weak spot with a single blow. Having adjusted himself, he exploded forward, holding his sword in front of him, and opened his eyes wide to see the enemy clearly. The bright light coming from them created a shadow behind them that resembled night. At the moment when they were already in front of each other, everything seemed to freeze. He struck first, while the Minotaur was holding the axe over him. But this broke his sword, and the Minotaur was never defeated. In those moments, he thought he was finished. As the axe was already flying at him, he pulled his hand back and opened his fingers in anticipation. As soon as the sword that the man had thrown was in his hands, he said that now it was definitely the end of this stupid cow. The Minotaur's axe and Dok's blade were a few centimeters apart. A large number of reporters and ordinary citizens had already gathered in front of the portal entrance, and one of them managed to notice someone coming out of it. As they got closer and closer to the exit, they rejoiced that they had finally gotten out of the hole. Dok asked the chairman how he could know that he would be able to catch that sword since it was behind him. The chairman smiled and said that he did not know. He just remembered his ability to fight when he did not see the enemy, so he decided to play for luck. He also smiled and joked that he had almost become a living skewer because they had been saved, so he had to thank him somehow. Namgundok denied that they were saved only because of him and that they were grateful to him. He led them to the edge of the portal and said that people were waiting because he was the main liberator of the dungeon and he had to make the announcement. At first, these words sounded like an echo, and I even asked him again, because all my life I had been trying to find at least a drop of talent in myself. But now everything was different, and he went a little further in front and raised his fist to symbolize victory. When night fell on the city, Dok finally managed to get to the hospital. I went into the room, opened the curtain, and carefully looked to see if my mom was okay. As soon as I was sure that she was fine, I was able to relax and calm down. Then I turned my attention to the TV, where the news was broadcasting that they had managed to interview the most dedicated participant of the purge. I saw that he was there, and reporters were asking questions to tell him how the process went and how he managed to do it so quickly. We even learned that his name was Dok, and he had to calm everyone down so that they could ask questions one by one. Then he managed to answer that no matter where he came from, he was here to protect a loved one, no matter what his ups and downs were. Without listening to the end, he turned off the TV because he could no longer listen and watch. Suddenly, I received a message. I picked up my phone and saw a photo of him hitting a lizard, and I could not believe my eyes that someone had managed to take a picture of this moment. The system sounded when I opened the notification screen and saw that his divine power had increased to 1,000 due to his popularity. This made me wonder how this was possible, and the next message was that a new part-time job was available due to the increased strength and whether he wanted to continue. Without a moment's hesitation, I decided to click yes when the offer popped up. It said that security guards were needed at Hephaestus's forge and warned that there might be problems with communication. The offer was good, but I wanted to rest first because I was exhausted from all the running around. A warning popped up that 3 gods were interested in the job, so he was given one last chance. Since he had nowhere else to go, he did not want to let go of such a seemingly easy job. After pressing it, a bright stream of light shone from the hospital window. When I got there, I couldn't think of a better place to move to. Rising up, he looked around the circles and wondered if he was in the right place, and if this was Hephaestus's forge. The heat was so hot that it was hard to breathe, like in a sauna, and I thought that God didn't even have air conditioning. Then a voice from behind him asked him if he was the new security guard and introduced himself as the owner of the forge, Hephaestus. Dokam was twitching and started to bow and said his name, but this behavior only made the blacksmith god laugh. While I was looking at the floor, I thought that he had hit him for sure, because I was sure that he had heard what I had said earlier. But Hephaestus was not going to do anything to him, just smiled and gave him a fist to greet him. He told him that his love for humanity was truly amazing and asked him if he had really fought in the dungeon of the Torah without any fear. Then I laughed and realized that it was no wonder that the hot-tempered Thor chose him. And he said that offering to put an air conditioner here was proof that he was brave after all. He asked me to finish with the congratulations because time was running out and I needed to explain everything. In order to have fewer questions, he first had to see someone to believe him and took out a horn from the portal to warn him that it might be loud. The sound was so loud that even with my ears closed, I could not hear myself screaming. At this sound, 3 men came running, and although they were shorter than Hephaestus, they were very muscular. He introduced him to them and told them that he would be a security guard and asked them to warmly welcome him. After they introduced themselves as gnomes, Dumdock scratched his neck a little embarrassed because he thought he wasn't really suited for the role, but he wanted to try. Hephaestus laughed again and asked not to be modest, since sometimes newcomers could do even more than the rest of us. Then he leaned over and whispered in my ear that these guys were experienced, but they had nimble fingers, and it could be difficult. They are like small animals, like dogs. They are more wild than large breeds. He also added that whenever he starts a new job, he always has to lose something. The pendant I was making for the goddess of love and beauty suddenly disappeared last Sunday. Dumdock asked if they could have stolen it, and Hephaestus took his head because he didn't know that was the problem. He had to leave for a day to go to the Olympus, so he hopes that nothing will happen during this time. But just in case, he gives him this weapon, which was Hercules' club made of olive branches. Its characteristics were that when you hit a living creature, there is a 10% chance that the muffling skill will be triggered. It was time to leave because he had a lot to do and asked me to look after his forge faithfully. Damdock tried to shout at him because he never explained what his job was. Hephaestus replied that everything would be fine, as long as he was as strong as they were, and that they were just a bunch of weaklings. As soon as he disappeared, he turned to the dwarves and smiled nervously, asking if they were done with their greetings. And the dwarf, who he thought was in charge, smiled, taking the cigar aside. He understood why Hephaestus gave him this club, as he knew that this could happen. So he turned to the gnomes and asked them to calm down and talk, as he had recently come across a cool weapon and it could hurt them. This did not make them change their plans, they just pulled out their weapons and pointed them at him. The dwarf boss took a drag on his cigar, blew out the smoke, and said one word, "Goodbye." As soon as I came to, I heard someone else with him, talking about some kind of award. When my vision was still foggy, I saw that they were also gnomes, but I could not see what they were showing off, only heard that Hephaestus had done it. And when he said that the pendant was meant for the goddess Freya, he immediately regained consciousness, but noticed that he was tied up. They saw that the guy woke up in front of them and were surprised because it was almost impossible because they had thrown a lot of sleeping pills into him. When they were silenced, Damdock turned to them menacingly, asking if they were tired of living. I asked if they seriously thought that everything would remain the same after they did this against one of the 12 gods of Olympus. I emphasized that this was their last chance to let him go before it got even worse, but they just started laughing out loud. They called him a fool because they are not afraid of Hephaestus, and if they were, they would not have taken up the task. Another one came out of the corridor and said that they had taken almost everything valuable, and now they had to get out of here. One of them shouted that they were going to shoot the guy with tranquilizer one more time and come back. They thought it was all very simple since Hephaestus was gone, and instead there was some weakling with a part-time job who whispered that they would regret it. This made them laugh even harder, and they couldn't stop laughing. But they didn't see that he was cutting the rope, and when it was cut, he had a smile on his face. He took out a baton and beat them with it, shouting that he warned them that they would regret it. After they fell unconscious, I found another rope and tied them both tightly so that they would not move. Tucking the knife back into his sleeve, he was glad to leave the dungeon with Master Duke, and I'm happy that I remembered the words of that girl after I finished and decided to thank her. I was about to leave when I noticed that one of the dwarves had dropped the pendant that Hephaestus had lost from his pocket. At this time, one of the dwarves told the boss that they had finally loaded all the minerals. The assistant boss shouted at them all to hurry up and leave. And their boss, the Red Fist, has something to tell everyone, so they had to shut up and listen. He called them all brothers, a tribe endowed with the spirit of the burning mountains, the best miners and bravest warriors. At this time, Damdok managed to use the situation while they were busy to sneak closer. The boss shouted that they were working for a reward, but it hurt their pride, and they wondered if they had ever been truly rewarded. The owner of this place, Hephaestus, was just humiliating them, but today they will finally take revenge for all their suffering. While they were shouting cheers, Damdok watched and did not know what to do next, so he punched the place where he was hiding. Because of this, it fell very loudly, and the eyes of others were immediately drawn to it. After a few seconds, they stopped staring in confusion and drew their weapons. He barely managed to escape from the bullets by hiding behind a column ahead of him. Hiding behind it, he could not understand when the dwarves learned to shoot like that. I also remembered the words of Hephaestus, and did not understand how they could be called weaklings at all. The boss ordered a ceasefire and came up to the column and asked if it was time for him to leave. Blowing out the smoke of his cigar, he told him that from now on they would clean up the entire forge, but their enemy was Hephaestus, and they had no complaints about him. In general, he thought it would be unfair if something happened to him, so he gave him a choice: either help him rob or go back to where he came from. He shouted to think carefully, as he would be a real fool to agree to a couple of kopecks as a reward. But he felt that neither option was suitable, that what would be said about him in such a situation would be the end of his reputation and his part-time job. So I couldn't let it happen because I had already been through so much. And on top of that, Hephaestus would definitely finish him off when he returned, and the forge was empty. So there were two options: fight these dwarves or lose your life at the hands of Hephaestus. He thought it would be a simple job, but it turned out that the world was very cruel to him. Then the boss, who came out of the hiding place, raised his hands in the air and praised him for the right choice. But you, Damdok, had a question for them. Aren't they Hephaestus's partners? Why did you have to go so far, and what will happen if he sees it all, thinking that he will not turn a blind eye to it all? The 12th god at the top of Olympus, the greatest blacksmith, didn't they think about what would happen if they made him angry? He will most likely put them in ovens and throw their bones into the hell of Cerberus for fun. Tired of listening to his threats, the assistant put a gun to his head and ordered him to shut up, and to watch his bad tongue, and added that he was not worthy of his forgiveness. I shouted at him to pray before the end and shot him twice under his feet, but the boss ordered him to wait. He was full of lies, so it was time to enlighten him by going in front of him and repeating the words he had said earlier that he called Hephaestus the greatest blacksmith. Because of this, I realized that he didn't know anything at all before he became bug food. He wanted to tell me something, but before he did, he took another drag on his cigarette, sparked it, exhaled, and continued. The so-called Hephaestus was neither an artisan nor a master, he was just garbage. In order not to be misunderstood, the boss replied that this was the truth, because how else could you call a robber? When he came to them on the mountain where they lived, he said that they made beautiful swords. Then he asked them if they wanted to work with him, and he would give them whatever they wanted. After they followed him, they literally became his personal slaves. He guaranteed that they would not have to pay for the workshop and that they would be able to use it for their own purposes, except on weekdays and work for 6 hours. In this beautiful life, where everything was promised to them, they did not notice how their personal souls as artisans were torn to pieces. When I finally realized this, there were no more gnomes here filled with the spiritual power of craft. That's why they all came together to finally take their well-deserved revenge. Damdok listened quietly and said that he realized what he had just said was really just garbage. Anyone who wants to destroy everything out of jealousy of the achievements of others is really garbage, and that's putting it mildly. The boss did not expect such a reaction to his story, so he growled and became very angry. When they pointed their guns at him again, he shouted for them to stop. And they listened to him before it was too late, and this is how it will look in the eyes of the others if they run away in this way. Will they become mere robbers in the eyes of others, or can dwarves, great artisans and glorified warriors, be so dishonorable? As an alternative, he knew a second way to restore justice. The weapon made by Hephaestus is now in his hands, but he is alone. If that's what they call themselves, I suggested they forget about these toys and fight him with real weapons made by them. Therefore, let them beat the warrior who is holding an article made by Hephaestus, or simply let them recognize that God is superior to them and simply run away. The assistant was also angry at the behavior of someone who was on the verge of death. He asked his boss if he could finish him off, but when he saw him getting angry, he made a red fist and told him not to run away. Rolling up his sleeves, he said that he was a good god to throw around loud words. He agrees to the duel, but then he will have to take responsibility for calling himself a warrior if he can't hold out long enough for them to check that their weapons are better. For his ridiculous statements, he will crush his bones to powder with his red fist. He rushed to the attack, saying that he should repel this blow if he could. The hammer blow was really very powerful, and he barely managed to bounce aside. The wave that came from the impact managed to create cracks on the floor and destroy the column at the back of it. The opponent noticed that he looked surprised, not that he really thought he could beat him. Because how can he, some god, defeat his dwarf boss, the Red Fist? But Damn Doc just smiled and asked in response if he wouldn't be surprised if it happened. He quickly jumped up from his seat, approached his opponent, and swung the club of Hercules. The blow was very strong, and he managed to dodge it by some miracle. Even to waste no time, I hit the man in front of me because I thought the enemy would not run away. But Damn Doc, standing behind him, asked him where he was looking, and all he could see was his shadow. The boss swung a hammer at him, but he managed to bend down and walk toward his opponent. He was about to strike when the dwarf boss jumped up and pushed off his shoulder and bounced back. He also had to move away to avoid a counterattack. He smiled at his boss and said that it was the first time he had been hit with a slipper, so he had to admit it was not pleasant, and admitted that he was quite capable. The Red Fist also smiled and called him a talker, but he understood at first glance. That he knows his limits well, Damn Doc was surprised how he managed to realize this so easily. The boss replied that what fool wouldn't, he had never heard or seen anyone use such a weapon before. Mentally, I looked at him and saw more of the rest of them, and it gave me goosebumps. He shouted that the last time his heart beat so hard, it was a sign that he was facing an equal or even stronger opponent. He sincerely asks to forgive him for calling him a god, and that the ignorant fool will take into account his power this time. Therefore, it will use all its power in the next attack. Dame Doc liked this mood better, so he got into a position and shouted to try it. Soon enough, the boss approached and struck a very strong blow that caused sparks to fly. This made it possible to jump out from under him and get in his back while blocking a punch. But he retreated, and they exchanged blows, each trying to defeat the other. After such a fierce battle, both of them had burning eyes with a thirst for victory. The gnomes watched them and enjoyed the spectacle so much that they forgot everything. The assistant noticed that this fight was like the strongest in the world, and his heart was beating very familiarly. Like an iron forge, the vibrations of the air made the sound of the metal resemble the familiar sounds of a forge. The flames of the battle with this guy were literally beating on their ears. Even the boss thought during the fight that it was easier for him to blame someone for not knowing how to be someone. The day they received the offer from Hephaestus, the great dreams they had turned out to be in vain, because they felt like frogs at the bottom of a well that had come out into the world. Hephaestus's incredible wares constantly reminded us of their shortcomings and this whole miserable story. Everything that happened after his promotion was a waste of time. In reality, it was a complete failure, so he accepts defeat with honor. Damn Doc spared no effort in the heat of battle and put a lot of skill into the last blow. But the baton did not reach its target. It stalled when it hit a strong hand. Hephaestus appeared just in time to save his subordinate from that powerful blow. It all went wrong, only because he hadn't been out for long, and at first, he even thought he was in the wrong place and would like to hear an explanation. Of course, he expected a battle to take place, but the mess was just terrible, and that was enough. Since it was time for explanations after these words, the Red Fist felt the eyes on him. He turned around, got down on one knee, and said that everything here was set up by him, and that his brothers had nothing to do with it. They were standing in the back and heard this, and were very shocked that their boss took over. He understood that any wrong decision was followed by a punishment, but his brothers had done nothing wrong, so he gathered his strength and wanted to tell. But Damn Doc didn't let him speak any further. He put his hand on him and took over. He said that this was his request and apologized for the disorder. The boss did not believe what he was hearing and wondered why he was doing this. Hephaestus angrily asked him. He had only been given the task of guarding the forge, so how would he explain all this? Before he began to explain, I asked him to look at what he was holding in his hands. Putting it on his hand, he replied that he seemed to be telling him that the pendant was missing. He was nervous because if it turns out where the jewelry was, not only he would suffer. Dumb Doc smiled and said that the dwarf boss helped him, since his task took up all his time, so he sent the captain to the warehouse to check all the products there. And he was just right to inspect inaccessible places and cracks, and that's where he found it. Hephaestus asked his boss if it was true, but he couldn't say a word. Waiting for him to answer, he stared at his ward intently. But then the god laughed. He didn't care how they found him. He praised Damn Doc for taking good care of the forge, and even found the pendant. I called him a cool guy, and now I finally understand why Toru took a liking to him. Then he turned his attention to the hammer and looked toward the red fist. He said that he was worried that the gnomes had lost all motivation and began to neglect their work in the forge. But this was unreasonable. The sound of this hammer must have been heard even at the Olympics. Therefore, I could say with full understanding that this hammer is better than any manufactured object. He has always watched him work, so he suggests that we continue working together. And in any case, hiring a mountain god was the best decision he's made in a long time. He asks us to accept this gift as a thank you for the work done. Damn Doc could not believe his eyes. This is the same reward that drops after completing SS levels. It would have been very rude to refuse, so he gladly accepted it and lifted the lid. I looked inside and saw a small creature curled up inside. He asked Hephaestus what kind of monster it was, and the latter hugged him by the shoulder and asked him to take a closer look. It looked like a little fox. Of course, such a gift was cute, but somehow I did not know what to say. God took the fox in his arms, looked at him slyly, and asked him if he could tell by his behavior that such a gift was not important to him. To show what he was giving up, he whispered some words into the animal's ear. It immediately glowed golden and turned into a sword in an instant. Hephaestus continued to play the role that he should be ashamed to give up such a thing. Damn Doc was shocked that he could turn into a sword. God laughed not just at the sword. It didn't matter if it was a scythe or a spear. It was the essence of the weapon. The fox can take any account, only if the weapon is not bigger than him. In other words, this creature is a very, very precious find for anyone. It is incredible, but still a shame to refuse such a gift. If he did not need it, he had no choice but to give it to the dwarves. Damn Doc caught up with him and laughed, saying how dare he refuse something given to him by Hephaestus himself. The fact that he didn't accept it right away was just a courtesy, but he takes good care of him. I picked up this fox, which looked so cute that it was hard to look away. He was also so snow white and fluffy that we decided that from now on his name would be Snowball, and he liked it. Hephaestus asked him to stand still, stretched out his hand to the fox, and a purple necklace of symbols appeared on it. Next, the treasure of the moon goddess Selene spoke, and from that moment on, Dam Doc became the owner of the moon fox. After that, the fox was definitely his now, and in addition, he had some small trinkets from the workshop for him. When I told him everything, I told him that he had to go back because he had a lot of work to do. He asked him to be careful on the way back, and he thanked him for everything. Just before he left, his boss stopped him with a red fist and wanted to tell him something. He wondered why he had lied to help them, since they wanted to take his life after all. Dumb Doc pronounced that he thought they were similar, his past and theirs were similar. The boss was surprised by this answer and told him that he could ask for anything just because of the resemblance. But he told him not to worry because he would not ask for anything, and asked if they did not all live in this world to help each other. And most likely, he felt that Hephaestus had guessed everything and just decided to leave it at that. The red fist bowed his head to him, thanking him for taking care of their tribe and asking him to accept his gratitude. Although the dishonor that fell on their tribe cannot be erased, he hopes that one day he will be able to change everything thanks to him, so he thanks him again. When Damn Doc returned to his world, it was still dark, and since he came back with some money, it was time to make some money. Shibane has been working in this field since he was a young man as a manager for hunters, and only last Sunday he was promoted to general manager. Ever since he got the best position in Korea, he said that he should start living in a new way, on a par with other aristocrats. I also always repeated that people say that it is the position that makes a person, so I always had to be stylish. He was jolted out of his thoughts by a voice that entered the room and greeted him. In front of him stood Damn Doc, who said that he had brought a bunch of things to sell, but he didn't appreciate it because he thought his appearance was terrible. The manager also noticed that he didn't look like a hunter, and his pet was too small and didn't have any armor or weapons. I thought that I had met people like him, often fools who called themselves hunters, who picked up all kinds of garbage in dungeons. But he could not send him away, and with a twisted look on his face, he greeted him and told him to follow him. They went to one of the rooms where the manager said that this was the Department of Goods valuation and that he could give the things to this man. The man behind the counter asked me to wait while he checked and evaluated the items. Seeing several items, I immediately asked where he managed to find them, and in order not to attract too much attention, he replied that a friend had found them. After that, the manager lost his nerve and started yelling at him that why the hell did he come to them with this garbage. He turned to the appraiser and asked if it was true that this guy had only brought garbage. But the man objected, because in the 40 years he has been working here, this is the first time he has seen a person who calls it garbage. These things are at least of the highest quality. They are definitely not lower than the 4th rank. The manager calmed down and couldn't figure out how this loner managed to get them. He had heard that there were modestly wealthy people, but he still had his doubts. But in order not to lose face, he kindly smiled and offered to take him to the VIP room. In the room, the appraiser said that if he decided to sell all the things, it would be about 3 billion won. He smiled, shrugged, and joked that he had only stopped here for 3 seconds and was silent for 10 seconds. I shoved my fist in my mouth and could not believe that 3 billion, not millions, was worth what Hephaestus called junk. The man added that this was an approximate price, and depending on the number of buyers, he could double it. The manager was also flying in his mind because the weapons that would have been bought at any price were right in front of him. I firmly decided that even if I had to kiss this guy's ass, I would definitely become his dealer. He stood up and asked him if he had any plans to sell the items. Damn Doc, holding his mouth, could barely say that he sells absolutely everything. The manager melted at these words, as the guy was the ticket to move on in his career, but he immediately added that he was not going to sell them here. Shi Bain, the former general manager, became the first person to be removed from his position on Sunday. In the second company, the managers bowed their heads in gratitude for everything. Dum Dum was walking down the street and couldn't believe that for the first time he had so much money in his bank account with so many zeros. All of them were surprised when he appeared, but not as much as the man from the department, who realized that he was very dirty, but still worked. As he walked down the street, he stopped because one thing caught his attention, as he had a lot of things to buy as gifts. The next day, he came to the hospital and brought his mother a bunch of gifts. She was shocked and could not understand where he got the money. A roommate asked if she ever turned on the TV to watch the news. When she turned it on, she added that her son is famous. People are crazy about him. And on TV, they said that Udam Dok almost went through the dungeon on his own. A neighbor said that she heard reporters say that he managed to cope because of his unusual talents. But he noted that he was not the only one who was making it up, and that they were right about the talent. He laughed when I told him that his talent had appeared recently, and that he hadn't really understood it. Suddenly, my mom hit the table with her fist and asked what happened. But she just hid, because tears of joy for her son appeared in her eyes, as she was very proud of him. The TV presenter said that he was here again with the latest news about the dungeon. The picture switched to the reporters asking questions to Namgun Duke, namely, what he could tell them about the newcomer. He said that he did not know the details, but he believed that he was the best among the hunters, and without him, they would not have cleared the dungeon in time. When my mother heard that the honorable man was talking about him, she stood up and asked him, but he thought that this might be his chance, because the more popular he was, the more divine power he would be given, and thus he would be able to find more part-time work. I came across a task from the Archangel Michael, where the reward was a golden apple that granted immortality. This part-time job was a great chance to cure my mother of cancer. Suddenly, the news was interrupted by a presenter announcing urgent news that the gates of Yongyin had opened. There was an order to urgently evacuate all citizens from that zone. When Sneejok saw that portal, he got scared and immediately hid behind his jacket. He asked him what was wrong, what happened, why he was so suddenly scared and shaking. Suddenly, Snowball told him what he felt, namely how a giant eye was looking at the ground. It made him sweat, and he took his head in his hands. It was the first time this had happened to him. The host went on to say that the association had convened the guilds because the gates, unlike the underground, did not allow people to enter. Many goblins came out of the gate indiscriminately and immediately attacked everyone. The commander of the swordsmen ordered everyone to get ready because the third wave was coming. At that moment, Udam Dok arrived at the spot and stood on the edge of the cliff to look at everything. After making sure that I was in the right place, I could start my plan. The swordsmen, who had been facing waves of monsters, finally dealt with the third one. The chief of them ordered them to rest before the new attack, but not to look too relaxed when reporters arrived. One of the swordsmen noticed something on the edge of the cliff, out of the corner of his eye. When I looked closely, I saw that there was a man who was also looking at something. He ran to the commander to report that the civilian was within the zone. He reacted angrily because the soldier had left his post without permission and before the reporters arrived. To somehow calm him down, I pointed my finger up and shouted to him to look. It brought him to his senses because the local situation in the affected area was very bad. But this made him even angrier, and he grabbed him by the cheeks and asked what the hell he was doing. He ordered me to run and get him out of there. The reporters were watching and did not understand what was going on. They were whispering about what they thought the commander of the containment unit was experienced, but apparently could not even cordon off the area from civilians. This could mean that he got the position through an acquaintance and that he would have something to write about in the news. When he heard what they were talking about, he turned around and walked in the other direction, muttering something under his breath. To solve the problem himself, he decided to approach the rock and use the skill of running through the air to climb it. The commander was very angry that he had to do everything himself. He told him that it was enough to stay here and that he could not see that it was a closed area and ordered him to leave. And he can easily shoot a video for YouTube in any other place. He understood that he was nervous at the sight of a third-level hunter, but Dumdock told him not to bother him. Moreover, I did not even know what he was talking about until that moment. The commander was angry at these words and also at why he was ignoring him. Damn Doc asked him what he was doing and wondered how such a person managed to survive the wave at all. Slapping himself in the face, the man could not believe that even some leftists were looking down on him. He wanted to put him in his place, so if he didn't understand him, a good punch should bring him to his senses. But the blow missed him, and he managed to knock the captain down with a deft dodge, and for the fallen person to put a footstep at the moment when he staggered after the impact. But in order to prevent a tragedy, Damdock managed to catch the man's hand, and he froze on the edge. I immediately apologized for not wanting to do this to him, and whether it was normal for a third-ranked hunter to hang like that. While he was screaming about who he was and what he was, Damdock pulled him by the arm and threw him over the ground. He raised his hands and told him to wait because he was interested in what people would say if he continued to wave his fists in front of him. Because many people were watching them at that moment because they attracted attention. Reporters began to peer in and recognize who was there. But they remembered that it was the guy who cleared the dungeon with the Namgun Guild, a new damn powerful hunter. Even the captain who heard his name shouted had heard of this guy before as the best hunter. Damdock waited for everyone to point their cameras at him and shouted to the reporters to take good shots, and soon there would be cool news. I turned around and asked the captain what they were talking about the left man looking down from the top, or about a punch that could bring him back to life. So he asked me to open my eyes wider and see what a completely left-wing person is capable of. He accelerated and jumped from the cliff to the bottom, heading straight for the gate at the bottom. If everything goes well, it will be able to enter the history in a few seconds. The gate received it, and then there was an explosion that sent waves in different directions. Reporters didn't even realize that it had happened, as the gate was a new phenomenon that appeared 10 years ago. Unlike the underground, only weak monsters appeared here, and after a while the gate disappeared. According to scientists, the main problem with the gate was that it went beyond human understanding. The system informed him that he had entered another world, and the abyss was looking at him. And he realized that if the gate was created by the gods, only a deity could enter. But it was not clear why people could enter the dungeons, but not here. The first thing I wanted to do was to go and see what was there, but there was a big energy barrier in front of me. Trying to break the barrier did not bring any success, but only more irritation. Every time he tried to penetrate beyond it, the system reported that he did not have enough divine power. Out of anger, he fell to the ground and made an indecent gesture to the mountain, shouting why he could not get out of there. After calming myself down, I sat down, but my head was spinning, and I had no other choice. So there was only one thing left to try, and then he got up, shook off the dust, and went to the cave. In his memories in the hospital, he recalled that he felt like he was entering a cave, but he did not want to. But I had to go at least to look at the face of the owner of this gate. After he defeated all the goblins from the cave, he complained that there were so many of them. I also thought that I could clear everything if I could kill the boss in the same way as in the dungeon, but there was not even a hint. Here, too, everything was completely different. The monsters from the dungeon were like programmed, but these fought consciously. The divine power grew exactly after I entered here, but I could have gotten it in another way. Looking ahead, he didn't see a monster waiting for him behind the stones, bigger than those goblins. The monster took a swing and wanted to hit him, but Damdock was able to react in time and jump away. It was clear from the look and feel of it that this creature was a boss, but there was something he really didn't like, because he was the boss. Such a slow monster would definitely not be able to do anything to him, and he was so angry about it. When he approached him and stabbed him with his sword, he easily stepped aside. I still couldn't believe that this was a real boss, and even though he was given this status, I planned to deal with him in an instant. He ordered Snowball to turn into a sword and struck the creature once. He immediately collapsed and fell to the ground and did not show signs of life. It was strange that there were no reports about the finish, and no one would ever believe that I had cleared the gate like that. To be sure, he mentioned that it was possible to get the core, which was located in the very depths of the heart, and thanked a YouTube video for this information. After several minutes of searching his body, they finally managed to find his devilish core. But for some reason, it was black in the video. On the contrary, it always shone and looked like a crystal. It also felt as if this thing was moving in his hands, and suddenly it howled. He immediately let go of the cannonball, and it began to run away. After poking at him a couple of times with his sword, he apologized to Snizhka and did not understand whether he had cut something wrong or whether it was the restless soul of the goblin. Taking it not the sword, a message popped up that it had received the gate core, so complete destruction began. The news that a person had entered the gate spread very quickly, and even more journalists came to the area. Even the scientists came, and one of them asked the head if they shouldn't stop it all because such news would cause chaos in the world. It was also very likely that a bunch of claims would fly against their academy for spreading false information. While they were arguing, the head of Yu Dam Dok appeared on the horizon. When I looked out and saw that there were a lot of people around, it was good because I was counting on it. Before answering a bunch of reporters' questions, I took a deep breath of fresh air and enjoyed the fresh air. The glare from the cameras flashed everywhere, and the journalists were impatient and asked a lot of questions. He asked everyone to stop and pay attention for a moment, not because of the situation there, but because from now on, humanity can destroy the gates. There were even more questions because no one had even entered the place before, and now they are talking about the whole destruction. Asking to adjust the camera lenses, he said that this was the core he had taken from the heart of the gate boss, so he asked to open his eyes and look. I put the cannonball on my hand and snapped my fingers to make it jump up. He loudly announced that he was going to show them all something damn interesting. In one clear motion, he sliced the cannonball in the air in front of hundreds of reporters. The gate behind him cracked and burst like colored glass. Even the scientists were very surprised. They did not expect this, no matter what experiments they had conducted on the gate. She turned to him and looked at him with a very intense look and asked who he was. He smiled because it was exactly the question he expected to be asked. The one who took the best position loudly said that his name was Yu Dam Dok, the mysterious hunter who entered the gate. The news that captured the attention of the public made Yu Dam Dok's name famous throughout Korea. A little later, when I opened the statistics window, I was informed that the divine power was growing very rapidly and had already reached the top of the rank. While he was focused on this rather important message, he saw a reporter approach him and shove a microphone in his face. And behind him, a bunch of others asked how he managed to enter the gate and how he got the cannonball to destroy the gate. At that moment, while they were blackmailing him with questions, a car drove up to the spot and a girl got out. Although the security guards accompanying her protected her from reporters, one of them recognized her. She immediately shook her cameraman, who started filming the girl, who was from the Namgun Guild. He finally calmed down the crowd of journalists and asked them to continue asking questions one by one. And then a girl came up and said his name and told him that her boss wanted to see him. Therefore, from that moment on, he had to go with them to the guild house. She was Ju So-young, a 7th level huntress and future head of the guild. As soon as we got there, I was a little surprised, but I also expected from a guild that is one of the top 2 in Korea that the house would be huge and the rooms inside would be gorgeous. I sat down on the couch and thought that he hadn't been taken away so urgently because of the news about the gate that they would most likely try to recruit him. And Ju So-young was not out of her mind. She was able to move up the list of guild leaders without any help and was a 7th level huntress. There were only 3 of them in the whole of Korea at this incredible time when thousands of hunters appeared, and she was known all over the world. Otherwise, she would not have taken it away from journalists so easily. People like her keep to themselves, but when necessary, they can part the Red Sea. But regardless of what was to come, this situation was good because he had time to check something. When he called the system, it greeted him and informed him that since reaching the top status, he had unlocked additional abilities. But what caught his eye the most was that the available titles, such as Thor, the god of thunder, or Ares, the god of war, were so cool that he had to find the coolest one at any cost. All you have to do is click and try to find the one you like the most. As soon as I opened it, I was happy, and there were many titles such as God of Fans or God of Fly Swatters, even a God of Water Bottle. Such names could not help but make him freak out and resent the person who came up with them. He took up the system screen and started flipping through the lists in search of a worthy title. An hour later, I found what I needed. A God of Swords, a name that suited his talent just fine. It was just super, and he didn't hesitate to click on the accept button to receive it. The system reported that the low-level deity Udamdok was called the God of Swords, and now this name has to enter it and become a part of it. The sensations were strange, and at first I was more frightened because of the strange sphere that entered him. I exhaled a sigh of relief and fell back on the couch, because as it turned out, finding a suitable title was quite a task. Then the system popped up again with a message that now, as it was called, the power control was unlocked and he had to choose the power of the God of Swords. This was great news because now he could finally use the power of the gods. But it also required divine power, even though I didn't have the best starting set, and I had to stop being nervous. After a few minutes of searching, he found it and decided that his first power would be his intuition. His profile now reminded him at least a little of the profile of a god. There was title and there was power. On top of all that, he was assigned many skills to try out and was interrupted by a knock on the door. He shouted out to ask who was there, but thought it couldn't be Chairman Nam Gundok since he had gone into the dungeon. No one else would have looked for him, and when he opened the door, there stood Ju So-young. She kindly asked if she could go to his room for a while, but before entering, she asked him to wait a minute because she had something to tell him. I handed him a card with a tiger emblem and said that the head of the guild asked me to give it to him. It was a special pass for members of the guild, and now he can use all the facilities on its territory. I smiled and thanked him, but in my mind, I suspected that it might be part of some plan. He stood there smiling like a fool, and she looked at him with a gloomy look, and there was a very uncomfortable pause between them. He felt even more uncomfortable because the girl was very silent. I also noticed one thing about her. She had a strange energy emanating from her. Snowball looked at her in surprise and abruptly jumped on her chest. He apologized to her, and this is the first time I've seen him behave like that. He's not usually like that. She asked me not to worry. Everything was fine for her. This animal looked very cute. Since she liked the fox very much, she asked if she could treat him to something. He said yes, and then Ju So-young took something out of her pocket and gave it to him. He thought the pet's behavior was strange, but he didn't care about the hospital staff, but he saw something in it. But he wondered what she was feeding him and asked Snizhka what she had given him. And she said that these are a kind of nutritional supplements in the form of nuts, and they are very useful. As soon as the fox came back, she said that it was nice to meet her and told Snowball that they would meet later. When she left the room, I fell on the couch and breathed a sigh of relief because it was quite difficult for him to communicate with her. He turned to his pet and asked if she liked him, and it was clear because he was lying in her arms, eating what she gave him without any doubt. But then she remembered how she said goodbye to Snizhka, and if you think about it, he did not tell her the name of the fox, so how could she know his name? I thought about what to do with her. At first glance, she seemed normal, but who knows, maybe she's a stalker. And while I was thinking about the situation, I received a message from the system. It could easily have been a new job, and I could have cleared my head a bit. The task was to feed Cerberus, and when I saw that it was a double payment, I even decided that the stalker could wait. The place where he had to go this time had many stories and narratives. After falling from a height, I thought that after a few jobs, I started to get used to it. A creature holding a lantern immediately appeared above him and asked in a hoarse voice who dared to disturb him. Because of this suddenness, I was scared at first and then realized that I was on a boat. The creature also did not understand what was happening, not even what was living in front of it. He told him that he was now on the river Styx, where the souls of the dead move, and that the way was closed to mortals. Damn Doc remembered what he had heard about this, which meant that, according to myths, Karen the boatman was standing in front of him. In order to avoid a conflict, I told him that I had come here on an important matter and asked if he could help me cross the river. But the man called him a baby and advised him not to wander around here and to run back. In this case, he asked where he could find Hades, and Karen was furious as a fool that he could call his name so recklessly. Damn Doc started to joke, and how else do you not have to call the ruler of the underworld the god of hell? The boatman stopped him, asking if he didn't care about his life anymore, but he replied that he had started it first. Charon raised his scythe above him and said that he had warned him, and now he should return. A lot of inflammatory, low-level gods fell here by his hand. So without saying anything useful, this is his last chance to run home before it's too late. In order not to say too much, instead of saying 1,000 words, Damdok made a fist and raised his middle finger. The boatman got angry and called him a self-confident fool, and if he wanted to stay here forever, he would fulfill his wish. He swung the scythe and pointed it so fast that at first I did not see his movements. His instincts helped him in time for the shot to pass him by, and he immediately called Snowball. Charon shouted that if he didn't move, he would cross the river. The next stroke also did not bring him the desired result, but Damdok smiled as he saw that the scythe was stuck in the boat. The man looked up, unable to believe that such a value could be in his hands. He also ordered Snowball to turn into a club instead of a sword, and asked Hercules if he recognized such a weapon. Charon was angry and said that of course he would recognize her as the human bastard who had beaten him and crossed the river alive. After hitting him once on the head and saying that he talked too much and had little time, the boatman asked him to at least pay the fare. But by the look on his face, I realized that I would have to carry him for free. As soon as the boat touched the other shore, Damdok kindly thanked him for listening. Charon took out his scythe again and watched as the god slowly got out of his boat. I took a swing and thought that the reckless fool who let his guard down would pay for it. Suddenly, it turned blue and the system reported that the intuition was activated. The blow flew past him at a crazy speed, and he did not realize what was happening to him. I quickly realized that it was my intuition that made my body move automatically. And now he couldn't just leave. He told Heron that after such a trick, he would definitely beat him up. Wiping his hands, he was angry that he had lost so much time because of the boatman's stubbornness. His attention was drawn to a voice coming from behind him, asking if he was the same person from the advertisement. It was a girl, and she asked him in a gentle voice if he was a temporary worker. She was the goddess of the underworld and fertility, Persephone. She smiled and said hello, and was glad that someone had found her because her husband was very angry that no one agreed. He also greeted me, said his name, and couldn't take his eyes off how bright she was. After meeting her, she asked him to follow her, as she would show him where Cerberus was. On the way, she told me that they used to call him to their place, but the man told them not to do it anymore because half of the workers ran away immediately. So the man decided that the workers should first demonstrate their skills with Heron to show their ability to negotiate. I thought it was right, since Cerberus is the guardian of the underworld in the legends, but he is the great god of swords. They came, Persephone said that the guardian of the underworld was right in front of him. His appearance made me nervous, and I remembered how the application said that the dog did not bite. The goddess also took out a letter and said that it was a warning about the dog that the man had written before he was about to read it. Before unwrapping it, I thought that Hades must have thrown it here empty-handed. It was written about Cerberus's preferences and triggers, and he threw that paper on the ground. The goddess smiled at this behavior and told him that the list was on the other side. When I picked it up again, I saw that breakfast and walk lunch and walk dinner and walk were marked in red, only in the underworld. He tore the list in two and shouted how he was going to take this devilish car for a walk, but the ad only talked about feeding it. Persephone looked at him calmly and said that it would be okay if he changed his mind. But I was a little worried because my husband caught the previous employee running away, and now he is locked up in hell. The man tore off his limbs, and that's all he could tell from his face, and I saw that I shouldn't have said that. Having quickly glued the list together, he said that he was a little nervous and asked where to start. Persephone pointed to the nymphs carrying the meat to the warehouse, and added that when the workers tried to deceive her husband, he also tore off his limbs. Having loaded all the meat onto himself, he decided to bring it all at once. Now he can take one piece and throw it to each of Cerberus's heads. At the sight of meat, he became very similar to an ordinary dog, except that he growled terribly. And when he took the piece in his hands, all three heads could not take their eyes off it. It reminded me of when I used to work part-time in an animal cafe, and big dogs also had their own beauty. And if you look closely, he even looked cute and tried to see if he would listen to him. But he lifted his paw and hit the ground, and the soil under his paw showered them from head to toe, along with Snowball. Both Cerberus and Persephone could hardly contain their laughter at this prank. She joked that finally, after a long time, there was a very interesting employee, and asked me not to even try to give him commands because he listens only to his husband. And now he realizes why no one wanted to accept the job, so he got angry and threw a piece of meat at the dog. That piece hit me in the middle of the head, right in the eyes, and I could even hear a pop. But he didn't want to do it that badly, and the other two heads were laughing at the center one. To shut them up, I also threw a piece at them, laughing that you can't laugh at a friend like that. Cerberus was enraged by this and took off running, approaching Damdock sharply, only to be stopped by a chain. The chain was very rough and tied to a rock, but the way he pulled it on made it shake. Patting him on the face with his hand, he told him that as long as he was restrained by the chain, he would not do anything to him. But suddenly he made another leap toward him, and his paw almost hit him. When I woke up, I saw that a piece of the broken chain was hanging around Cerberus's neck. The next attack almost took his life as the dog's face passed very close to him. Persephone saw that the chain had broken, and Dum-Dum shouted to her why she was frozen. He grabbed her by the arm and shouted at her to run away because they could be killed. This crazy dog almost ate his breakfast because of some common joke. As they ran, I argued with her about why the chain broke so easily, but she didn't know what to say for the first time. Cerberus was catching up very quickly, and Persephone told him to stay close to her, even though she looked like that, but she was still the wife of Hades. He would not attack her, and when they stopped to check, the dog growled above them, and the confidence that he would not attack her was abruptly lost. Since it was an emergency, I had to push the goddess away from me and call Snowball. He turned into Hercules' club while they were in the air to try to silence him. His punch did not bring the desired result, and he noticed too late that the paw was already flying at him. The blow glued him to the ground. There were a lot of wounds on his body, and I wondered why he was so strong. Persephone screamed at him to save himself. She could not help him, but he couldn't hear her. Everything was like a fog, no matter how hard he tried to listen. Noticing that she could not hear, she tried to somehow distract the creature by ordering it to stop. But he didn't hear her and just got more angry and started running at Damdock. He watched him rushing at him, thinking that it was the end of the dog feeding, and became food himself. At the last moment, he changed his mind about staying alive, pushed himself off, and fell into the river Styx. Persephone stood there shocked, knowing that now he would definitely end up there. When I was drowning, I felt an incredible cold piercing my body, and I couldn't even move a finger. He thought it was the end, but everything that had happened to him so far, and even the part-time jobs he had worked for all his life, felt like an illusion. It seemed as if consciousness had left the body and my thoughts were rushing forward. As they say, before leaving this world, one's whole life flashes before one's eyes. He could see Snowball swimming toward him, but he could not tell him to leave him and save himself. When he got close to the owner, he grabbed his face with his paws and tried to pull it up, but it was no use. So I decided to try one more trick. I bared my razor-sharp teeth and bit hard on the nose. It worked. The pain brought him to his senses, and he turned around and saw many hands grabbing him and pulling him down. Because of them, my eyes began to darken. The snowball became more and more indistinct, and at that moment, I remembered the boss of the gnomes. The next thing that happened was that the fox turned into a gnome hammer, which Dum-Dum managed to swing away from his hands. In a few swings of the hammer, he managed to swim up from the depths and see what was pulling him down. Then he grabbed himself by the face and felt that his body had suddenly run out of oxygen and he had to swim. Having surfaced to the surface, I have never been so glad to get a wide breath of air, and also getting to the surface of the tambourines that returned from the other world. He still had Cerberus in front of him, and his appearance made him even more furious and roared. The mouth closed abruptly when half of the body was already inside it, as if the world was frozen. It was strange why he did not feel pain, although he felt as if he were alive, and his teeth were definitely squeezed. With wide eyes, I watched the system report that the Styx River effect was activated. Immunity to poisons to muffling to bleeding, and, most importantly, to physical attacks. I remembered from mythology that if you plunge into the river Styx, you can become a victorious warrior, as the goddess Tethida did with her newborn son. To make him the strongest warrior, but his heels did not touch the water as she held the baby by them, so the myths about Achilles' heel began. And if you think about it, he just plunged from head to toe and now he's not winning. Meanwhile, Persephone tried her best to snatch him from Cerberus's mouth, but he tried to chew it several times and spat it out himself. The goddess was shocked by these events. Dumdock was lying on the ground with Snowball covered in dog saliva when he heard that it was very, very disgusting. When I opened my eyes and stood up, I noticed that how can you call someone who has returned from the other world vile? She couldn't believe how he managed to survive and feel good after falling into the river. When I heard that he swam out of there rowing a hammer, my eyes popped out of my head. Cerberus again ran to them and grabbed Damdock and began to play with him. He only stopped from time to time to check if he was alive, but his toy was still mocking him. Persephone, who was watching, refused to accept that the low-level god was completely fine after being bitten by Cerberus. Damn Doc put his hand on his head and told the dog that now that he had fed him, it was time for a walk. Even knowing that there was no point in trying to destroy it, he still growled. When I asked him again if he wanted to go for a walk, Cerberus immediately calmed down. He turned around and began to search for something on his backside. Damn Doc did not understand what was wrong with this dog in the pet store. It worked flawlessly. As it turned out, he was looking for a chain, and when he found it, he turned around and gave it to me. Persephone came up to them as she had something to report since the last time Cerberus walked, so she asked them to be a little calm. He thanked me for my worries, but asked me not to worry because he was an expert in walking dogs, even nicknamed the Master of Dogs. As soon as I pressed lightly on the chain, in an instant, Cerberus pulled it along. The dog was running so fast that he did not hear someone on his backside, and he was shouting in a voice that was not his own. It was hardly a good walk, as he was knocking down everything on the way. The system also notified me that I managed to complete the task of moving 100 kilometers per hour for 3 minutes, and the wind speed skill was opened. Persephone caught up with them and shouted to Damdoku to use his divine power to strengthen his body. He asked her what she meant, and then wondered how she managed to run so fast. She repeated once again that he should strengthen himself with divine power because Cerberus was too strong. I saw that nothing was being done and asked him why nothing was being done, but he didn't know that it could be used, thinking it was just simple statistics. To find out how to activate it, I called out to help me figure it out. She stopped abruptly, not believing that he could not do it, but his cry was very true. Persephone caught up with her again and asked her to remember how it felt when he used his power. Even though there was complete agony around her, she managed to gather her thoughts and remember that she had joined the fight with Karen. Then, to help, I shouted to him to imagine trying to control the water in his body. I closed my eyes and tried to calm myself down even more and imagine the water circulating through my body. When I opened my eyes, I saw a golden energy around my arm and that my arm became stronger. Cerberus felt like he was attached to a chain like some kind of weight, and he stood up sharply. Damdoc could not believe his eyes that he managed to stop this dog. Although he succeeded, his strength was gone instantly, as holding the beast would be another challenge. Since he succeeded, Persephone said that now she had to concentrate on the part of her body she wanted to strengthen. But Cerberus didn't want to give up. He grabbed the chain with his teeth and pulled not only with his weight, but also with his muzzle. When he was able to pull again, he had to immediately direct the divine power to the right place. The effect was so strong that we were able to throw Cerberus into the air and then slam him down to the ground. Dumb Doc also indignantly told the dog that the walk was over, and it was time to go back. Even if he thought about resisting, there was no point. With his new skills, he easily managed to drag him along. The goddess was surprised that even when he used the divine power for the first time, he was very strong, and he thinks that now they have a very capable employee. Dame Doc was a bit surprised, seeing what she was capable of, and why she didn't use these powers herself. I went up to her and asked if I could ask her a question, and she said yes, and then I asked her, why does she shun Cerberus when she was 100% sure that she could easily conquer him? This question made her a little nervous, and she barely mentioned that there were special restrictions. She turned her head away and quietly continued that Cerberus is the guardian of the gates of the underworld. He controls an infinite number of souls trying to escape back to the world of mortals. She also blocks the path of those who want to leave out of curiosity, and she is one of them, a goddess who wants to go back. She turned her face back, opened her eyes wide, and looked at him. Her answer even made me sad, as it turned out that she could not change anything while Cerberus was around and could only wait for handouts from Hades. I remembered that in the myths, Hades, fascinated by the beauty of Persephone, kidnapped her and locked her in the underworld. This meant that she had been abandoned by everyone long ago, which made him even more upset. But he caught himself thinking that he could not do anything because Persephone's husband Hades was the brother of the greatest god Zeus. And I'll throw him out of these thoughts because I forgot about Snowball, who appeared because of all this running around. They continued on their way back all the way, but Cerberus refused to walk and Damn Doc pulled him. As soon as we approached the gate, he jumped up and growled as if he felt something. Persephone told me not to worry, it's his job. He feels souls despite his appearance and does his job flawlessly. This was another reason why she could not go any further and pointed to a rock to which she could tie the dog, and that would be the end of her morning's duties. Damn Doc continued to stare at her, amazed that the dog was controlling the goddess, suggesting that Hades was paranoid. He also wondered why Hades fed the dog so much that it became so healthy. Just as I was about to throw the chain, my intuition kicked in, and I started to see something in the center of the stones. Persephone didn't look at what he was doing, but kept telling herself that since she was done with the morning, she had to get ready for lunch. But when she turned around, she couldn't understand why he had punched the stone to which Cerberus was to be tied. Damn Doc scratched the back of his head and smiled, and apologized because he thought there was something precious inside. This is a Cerberus collar used by Hades to train his pet, and if he wears it, he will obey perfectly. The goddess asked him how he did it, because she could not find him as long as she searched for him. He explained that it was just intuition, but he didn't believe it was the same collar. Cerberus was a symbol of hell, and commanding him meant commanding all of hell. But I thought it might be better not to touch it, since it was Hades' property and he didn't want any trouble. Persephone put her hand to her mouth, lowered her eyes, and seemed to be thinking about something. She said she could try to wear it, since there were no bans on its use, or anything like that. Her husband often offered her to try speaking as soon as he found her. Listening to her, one could understand that they were having family difficulties, but I couldn't let such a good fortune go. He approached the dog, showed him the collar, and asked if he remembered what it was, when he turned around and asked if he hadn't already realized that they were not rivals. To make sure the dog understood, I decided to give him an extra lesson, and the thought made him smile. As soon as the collar was around his neck, the dog's behavior immediately changed and became calm. After making sure that everything was working, I intended to play with it a little bit, sitting, lying, even turning over. Finally, I turned him to face the gate and made him look at it. I told him that it was because I had bitten him and almost torn off his arm while dragging him, and I had to sit and think about my behavior for a while. Such ease of management made me think that if everything went well, this would be the best part-time job. He turned to show off to the goddess Persephone, but stumbled over her finger. Everything froze over him. A green glow appeared around him, and everything somehow calmed down. His body lost strength, so he fell to his knees, and his eyes became increasingly heavy. She said that before he left, the man gave Cerberus 2 orders. First, to control the souls that try to escape, and the second one to control Persephone. She thanks him for this opportunity and promises to return before her husband comes. Before I closed my eyes, I finally realized that it was not hell that was important to Hades. Although he realized that he could not let anything happen, his eyes closed and he fell asleep. As soon as he started pretending and opening his eyes, he could see Snowball out of the corner of his eye. But I had no strength yet, so I lay there looking at the sky and gathering my thoughts. When he got up, he thought abruptly that he had fallen asleep. But how it happened? I turned around and saw that Cerberus was still sitting in front of the wall and the goddess was not there. I wanted to find out how long I had been sleeping, and then a system window popped up saying that there were 5 minutes left until the end of the River Styx effect. He had to run fast to find her and ordered Cerberus to guard Hell until he left. Since Persephone could not leave Hell because of the dog, and if Hades finds out that it is because of him, he will definitely not survive. It was unclear how far she had run away, so we had to find her and bring her back as soon as possible. He mentioned that he had recently learned a new skill called wind speed, and that it can be significantly improved by the user's physical characteristics. As soon as the skill was activated, I was able to get from one point to the other in an instant. Before that, I could never have imagined that I would ever be able to move so fast. Now, to try to enhance the effect, I wanted to add divine power to the skill. I managed to jump so high that the trees below seemed small, and I could see the river. It was then that I was able to see where she could have gone. Using the skill of combat focus, I saw that she was sailing on a boat on the river. Persephone moved calmly through the water, and her path was illuminated by the moon through the dark clouds, until Damn Doc jumped out of the water and scared her to death. He looked at the goddess sternly and asked where she was going in such a hurry. As soon as I got on the boat, I was screaming out of emotion that I had told him that I shouldn't cross the Styx River alone, so what the hell was I doing? Persephone lowered her head and whispered that she was sorry. She just wanted to see her mother. Blinking one eye, she said she could not worry because there were still 2 days until her husband returned, and she had never been caught during her raids. This information did not calm Dame Doc down, but he realized that this was not the first time. While they were talking and not steering the boat, it crashed into a rock that was in its path. As a result, a hole appeared in the side of the ship, and water quickly began to enter the interior. I looked at the shore and saw that the boat was unlikely to survive the journey, and the effect of the river stick was about to end in 15 seconds. There was no choice but to hold my breath and jump into the cold water. He gripped the boat tightly and shouted to the goddess to make sure that nothing happened, but to hold on well. They managed to get to the other side of the river, where it was already very bright from the very beginning. Persephone was happy to have managed to get to such a wonderful bright place. Damdoc stopped her and wanted her to promise him something, that they would come right back as soon as she met her mom. She blinked one eye again and replied that of course she hadn't told him that she had never been caught. But this did not reassure him, because if something happened, he was definitely screwed. She took his hand and offered to go together and pulled him along. As soon as we got to the right place, I wondered why all the Greek gods live in caves. Inside, a woman was sitting quietly. Demeter, the goddess of fertility. She stood up and looked at her daughter and could not believe her eyes. It had been a long time since they had seen each other. I caught her by the face and looked at her, making sure she was not dreaming. Standing behind them, Damdoc began to feel that he was clearly superfluous. Something caught his attention because when they walked in, there were flowers at his feet. Knowing that, according to legend, during the time Persephone was locked in hell, the plants around her died from Demeter's grief. He waved at the goddess and said that he had remembered something and was leaving, and that they would meet by the river at 8 o'clock. She called him back, smiled, and was grateful to him from the bottom of her heart. All this time, while the goddess was with her mother, he tried to repair the boat, and when he was done, he shook his hands. I took it out to look at the clock, and it was 8:03. She was supposed to be back. Someone quietly walked up behind him and plucked flowers from the trees. Damdoc heard someone there and turned around to see that the goddess had returned. But there was another person there who spoke to him first, saying that the arrogant god had gotten a job with him. My intuition and all the sensations in my body sounded the alarm, and the system sent out a warning about the danger. He looked at him, holding the flower in his hands, and asked in a quiet, calm voice where his wife Persephone was. Damdoc started shaking like a washing machine just by saying a few words. In an instant, he moved to him, staring so intently that he couldn't even move. He went on to say that he did not understand how someone like him could find Cerberus's collar and help Persephone escape. But it didn't matter to him because now he was destined for the afterlife. When his hand almost touched his forehead, a woman's voice shouted from the side what he was doing. It was Persephone, who was outraged at Hades because he wanted to send an innocent deity to the next world. They were both surprised to see her and turned around to look at her. The goddess didn't stop because her husband himself told the workers to find Cerberus's collar, so why is he so angry now? Coughing into his hand, Hades barely managed to say that it was true, but he felt that running away without saying a word was a bit wrong. Persephone was even more outraged because she did not run away, but only wanted to go out for a short time and came back as soon as she saw her mother. Hades was telling her what she should have said, and she snapped back that from now on she would have to be held accountable for every little thing. Damdoc, who was watching them, could not believe that the god Hades himself was not worried. Since Persephone did not finish speaking and they had to return to the underworld, she took out a gift. I gave it to him and told him that it was for a job well done. Hades asked if she would let him live after all, but the goddess said that this god had done his job perfectly and called him a narrow-minded person. Damdoc also asked that she would take care of his salary, so she insisted that he not send an appeal to the system. I said goodbye and asked for one more request. Don't even think about coming back here. After these words, he stood in the room for a moment, barely saying that he had almost said goodbye to his life. In any case, she said it was a gift, so I took it without hesitation, and now I was curious what it was. As soon as he untied it and lifted the lid a little, the report glowed brightly. One apple was a forbidden fruit that gave the ability to separate good and evil, and the golden apple was a symbol of immortality and gave eternal youth. This apple could cure my mother, but there was a question whether it could be used by people. He picked up the dark apple, held it lightly with 2 fingers, and looked at it closely. The next day at the hospital, the doctor who treated my mother was shocked to see that the cancer cells had completely disappeared. Even modern medicine has no explanation for this phenomenon. My mom didn't believe how this could happen, and Dum Dum said that she had a happy future ahead of her. The golden apple worked, and I considered myself lucky that I didn't peel it off, as the effect might not have been the same. Since the doctor said she was completely healthy, he offered to return home. While they were gathering outside, when evening came, they called a taxi and left the hospital when it arrived. Damn Doc asked the driver to kindly take them to Hwaseong in the Banwol district. But the driver warned me that to get there I had to make a circle, so I asked why. The taxi driver explained that he hadn't heard anything yet, but that there had been a disaster near the park. I turned on the radio to see for myself, and a journalist said that he was reporting near Yodo Park. Not long ago, a cylindrical massif appeared there, so the local guilds were evacuated and hunters gathered to investigate and clear it. His mother took him by the shoulder and told him that she could get home on her own, but he had to go. She realized that he was needed there and couldn't wait to see him again on TV. When I left the taxi, I saw that this building resembled the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Hiding from the setting sun, I realized that I would most likely have to work all night long. He smiled and asked if the snow was ready and if it was time to go. But before I left, I wanted to go to the Divine Store and saw that there was no payment for the part-time job yet, but my profile had been updated and my title changed. The title was given to the one who tamed Cerberus, and from now on he could tame any dog without exception, because now he was the Lord of Dogs. I immediately remembered how the manager of the pet store where he worked said that there are no bad dogs. He was interrupted by a voice shouting that everyone should look there because something was there. He thought he was the one who was being noticed, so he stepped aside. But there was Ju Soyul, and she and her team were surrounded by cameramen asking various questions. Once I was sure that no one was approaching him and all the attention was on her, it became a little easier. I also heard her say that, without breaking tradition, the Sangun Guild always arrives at the scene of disasters, and said that for today, that was all the comments. This answer was surprising to him because she simply ignored them all. There was a chance that he could also be recognized, but there was no time for that, so he disguised himself a bit. When we got inside, the team gave us different scenarios, and most of us thought that an unexpected attack would take place. They knew it was dogs, and that the expected attack from hounds was not a threat. They also joked with each other that the last person to enter had been bitten by dogs. Ju So-young raised her hand and ordered them to be quiet and calm down. Two of them said that it must be about them because they were loud. The assistant approached the head, but she ignored him and noticed that something was wrong with her because of her strange behavior. She was never particularly talkative, but she was never annoyed by this. I wondered what she could see in front of her that made her change her behavior. After a few minutes of staring into the darkness, she told the team that they were approaching. There was more than one dog there, and they were not as small as they said. As soon as the team saw them, their opinions immediately changed that they could easily handle it. The assistant saw that if anyone was injured, they risked being poisoned. Their venom can take the life of anyone in just 10 minutes. They are not really poisonous monsters. Even Ju So-young recognized that they were facing a rather problematic enemy, and ordered those who were not strong in close combat to withdraw, and the rest of us had to draw our blades and follow her to the front. Suddenly, someone said goodbye after her words. The assistant turned to his subordinates and shouted at them who dared to do such a stupid thing. But he pointed his finger forward because he thought the sound was coming from the dogs. In the darkness, a human figure appeared, and the face was not visible only after the command to the dog's leg to sit down next to him. The fact that the dogs were following his commands caused fear in the pen because they did not know their enemy and what to expect. The assistant gathered his courage and stood in front of the head of the pig and stood behind him. He held out his sword and shouted that whoever was there should show his face. Damn Dak came out and asked him to take the sword away because it scares his dogs. The assistant opened his mouth when a man came out of the shadows, not some strong monster. At this time, one of the dogs that was not tamed appeared on Ju Soyul's backside. Having noticed Dam in time, Doc activated the wind speed and moved to her. I grabbed her by the arm and pulled her to me, as there was no time to understand, and put her behind my back. Then he hit the dog in the head with his fist, scolding him for not biting them and calling him a bad boy. The effect of the title of the one who tamed Cerberus was activated by physical contact. At the moment, 32 dogs were already listening to him. The assistant calmed down as he saw that the man's actions were aimed at defense and not at attack. Damn Doc looked at Ju So-young and saw something familiar about her. The bracelet on her hand was all too familiar to him, the same as the goddesses. He said to her that they had met again unexpectedly. She quietly said that it was not very appropriate now because there were so many people around them. But I noticed that such a bold step was quite balanced on his part. Damn Doc started yelling that it was not a good match and that it was not necessary to film it. When everyone calmed down a bit, he made a commanding look and turned to the dogs. He ordered everyone to sit down and listen carefully to his next commands. The first 10 had to dig where he pointed, and the rest had to help them. The dogs immediately began to dig in the ground in the specified place after receiving the order. They dug until red, bright crystals appeared from the ground. As soon as he managed to get one of them, he brought it straight to his master for praise. The cleanup team could not believe their eyes that this was possible and that such creatures obeyed so well. Ju So-young, watching what was happening, approached Damdok and appreciated this ability and asked him how he got it. This question really stuck out to me because everyone around me usually perceived talents as innate skills. But she asked him exactly how he managed to acquire such skills. I could not remain silent either, so I answered that I did not receive it, but was born with it. But he also had a question for her about her bracelet, wondering if it was hers. She raised her hand, not understanding what he wanted, and said that of course it was her bracelet. Then Damdok came closer, pointed his finger at it, and asked where she had bought it. I pressed her impatiently to get this information as soon as possible. Dame Doc no doubt recognized the same antique design. It was the same friendship bracelet as Persephone's. But where could this bracelet have come from? Ju So-young looked at it intently. Then he came to the conclusion that he thought the girl in front of him was a stalker maniac. She gave me a very strange look and said that she had bought it on the internet. After that, a message from the Forbidden Fruit Effect popped up that she was telling the truth. And when she told him that if he liked it so much, he could send a link, the system again said that she was telling the truth and her intentions were good. He immediately started playing the fool and saying he was super and that he had always wanted one. When the rest of the team imagined him playing with a woman's bracelet, they almost threw up. They immediately started whispering that he liked women's things and that the reason he got the bracelet was because of it. And I thought that maybe I became a little more sensitive after traveling the world, so I overplayed the role a little bit, and now they will think that he is a pervert. His entire reputation could have gone down the drain, so he decided to switch his focus. I asked Ju Soyol how she knew Snishko's name and whether she had already dug up some information on him. Even to this, she calmly replied that she had heard from others. Namely, at the gate, she heard someone say, "Snowball, let's go." The system again reported that the target's intentions were good, which meant that he was telling the truth. I was amazed that she had already told the truth twice, which means something. In fact, he was a crazy stalker who went crazy because of a misunderstanding. After that, they went on and reached a large door behind which the boss was supposed to be. It was true that a monster appeared in front of them, called them nothing, and told them to say goodbye to their lives. The monster didn't even see a fist coming right at his head. The assistant was amazed that he had managed to punch his boss so easily. He fought himself, leaving nothing of the enemy. All that was on him was the dirt from him. Damdok exhaled and went to the assistant and asked him to keep the fact that he was in the dungeon a secret. Even what I did and said here had to be kept secret. While the assistant went to ask one part of the team, Damdok went to the other. Ju So-young looked at her bracelet and thought about something. After killing the boss, they came out of the dungeon, and there were many flashes from cameras around them and various questions from journalists. As soon as they stopped, the disguised Damdok had a chance to get away from them without being seen. And during the stop, Ju So-young answered journalists' questions in one sentence, that she was glad that no one was injured during the mission. As I listened to her, I thought that I had been blind until now because the divine powers had suddenly collapsed. Because if you want to work as a hunter in this country, you have to pass a test, because such people have great powers and the guilds have to control them. That's why you can find any information about hunters on the internet, and since I was not a legal hunter myself, my reputation suffered. And while everyone was focused on Ju, Soyuzul wanted to quickly disappear as he was walking. He ran into a guy. He recognized him, but asked if he was really Yu Damdok. The guy raised his glasses, laughed, and asked what a hopeless insect like him was doing here. People heard him shouting his name and began to draw more and more attention to them. They were interested in why he said that because the news said that he was very strong. The guy put his hand on him and asked if he would even greet him. Damdok himself was not happy to see them. He wanted to ignore them at first, but it didn't work out. The fool who ruined his school years was himself from a rich family, and he made it seem that it was not the gods who ruled the world. But everything was decided by money, which was not the case now, and he was no longer an obstacle. I grabbed him by the arm and took him away from me, but at the last moment I changed my mind. He replied that he hadn't changed at all, that he had a dirty mouth and remained so. Zhongchun didn't even realize what he had just said and asked him what he had just said. He called me a ragamuffin who got a little bit of fame because he cleared the dungeon maze and destroyed some gates. But there was one detail, so he asked me to finally be honest and admit that he had no natural talent. He will not believe in his life that an insect like him managed to do all that. Damn Doc heard out of the corner of his ear that the people looking at them were saying that this might be true since he was not even on the hunting registry. Jusoyol came up to them and silently took off his cap without even looking at them. Without any explanation, she handed it to him and walked on. Jongchun asked if he had a contract with her, because how could he explain that she was covering up for such a piece of garbage? These words even hurt her, and she looked at me and said that the lack of talent does not make anyone trash, and asked if she could answer for her words. But he just shouted about what responsibility she was talking about as he pointed the finger at him, the talentless cretin. She squinted her eyes, turned her head to Dame Doc, and stared intently. He realized that she was trying to tell him something, but he had to figure out what else. The first thing that came to mind was that she was hinting that he should stand up for himself, showing his abilities, which was not difficult at all, and bend the bus on its ass. Since an ordinary person could not have done it just like that, Jongchun was shocked. But then he continued to say that it was impossible and that he was just a piece of garbage. Since these conversations were just wasting his precious time, he decided to leave without paying attention. After the incident with Jongchun, he finally realized that he needed to get his hunting qualifications as soon as possible. Luckily, I heard that the test is held on Dokdo, so I carefully planned everything that should go my way. As soon as the window rolled down, Ju So-young appeared in the car that had just arrived and offered to give him a ride to the test. When we got to the right place, he got out and thanked me for taking him comfortably. But she wasn't going to leave him alone, so he didn't understand why she left too. In order not to torture myself with unnecessary guesswork, I asked her, and she honestly replied that she had no plans for today. He also asked why she started communicating informally, since she and Jongchun are the same age and they can be friends. The system showed that the target's intentions were good, so he responded with a friendship. The loudspeaker said that number 1117 had to go to Zone H to take an endurance test. He said that he had to go and asked Snizhka not to worry as he would be back soon. Looking at the two of them, I thought that the fact that she went with him could be because of a pet. Because apart from the fact that she feeds Snowball, he sees nothing suspicious in her actions, and all her answers are recognized as kind. When I changed clothes and went to the site, everyone was warned that all participants could use only their equipment. The first test was based on checking the body's endurance, so the first task was a squat with a barbell. The examiner said that the number 1117 was set to the maximum difficulty, and he couldn't even move. A familiar voice told him that he needed to know his place, and a message from the system showed that his intentions were bad. He laughed and shouted to hurry up because if he didn't, he would automatically fly out, and then realized it was Jongchun. From the very beginning, I was thinking of getting out of here as soon as I got the license, but not after it appeared. As soon as he said that garbage like him should know his place. He had a lot of anger and managed to lift the barbell, and for that, he received 6 stars for lower body strength. The next task was a little easier, and I was able to complete it calmly and also get 6 stars for upper body strength. When they put the tires on and told me to pull them, I got 5 stars for overall strength. The speed task was also easy, so I also got 6 stars for it. Jongchun, who had been making the task more difficult all along, did not believe that he was showing such results. I ran to the head of the test and yelled to stop the test immediately, but he couldn't interrupt it unless there was an error. Jong-il shouted even more that it was a mistake that such garbage was able to achieve such results. At the end, they congratulated me on the passage and added the results that coordination is 6 stars, and flexibility is 4 stars, dexterity is 5 stars, and reflexes are 6 stars. At the next stage, an examiner appeared and congratulated all hunters who managed to pass the entrance exam. This time, they want to test the ability to work in a team and push a button. They are not allowed to use any weapons other than those they received from them. They also had to remember that if they killed a monster from the other team, it would not add to their team points. The creatures that came out of the water and looked like fish immediately rushed into battle. Though the man managed to block the monster's blow, his legs buckled from the force and he fell. Damn Doc managed to block the sword in time and did not allow his friend to win. He shouted to see if he could get up and, realizing that he could barely move, added that he was taking the monster on. Intercepting the sword, he swung and sent the creature away from him with a direct blow. To be sure of victory, he quietly approached her, but she showed no signs of life. The rest of the team turned their attention to the second monster, and they tried to defeat it. When he saw that, he decided to defend his comrades and get rid of anyone who could threaten them with a deft movement. It was so fast that they did not see it happen. They just stood there with their mouths open. But we were grateful for the number 1117 because it helped us pass the exam quite well. Chong-chun walked down to the first defeated monster, looking at it intently. So far, no one has seen a red substance poured into the monster's mouth. A warning popped up from the system that a very high bloodlust was detected. The monster came to life the second he was near Damdok and swung his sword at him. Thanks to my reflexes, I managed to block the blow in time, but it became stronger than before. The second blow threw him back, and in order not to fly too far, he stopped himself with his sword. The team was shocked how one of the creatures could still be alive after being hit by that guy. Because they said this out loud, the creature noticed them and turned around and looked at them with crazy eyes. Instantly, it moved to where they were standing, and the first person to be injured was a girl, and the monster took her by the face and slammed her to the ground. A man standing next to him was hit in the stomach with a powerful blow from the tail, which made him fly away. The third was hit in the neck, causing him to immediately lose consciousness and fall to the floor. The monster was raging, and his thirst for blood only intensified after defeating the three. All participants, except number 1117, failed the task. Chong-chun flew up, put on his glasses, and said that now he could not win without a team. I added that I had warned him before not to hold his nose so high. Dum-Dum thought about it and realized that the fool was obviously cheating to make him lose. Chong-chun saw that he was not going to give up and shouted that it was pointless, he would not win, but was only told to shut his mouth and watch. Using my swordsman's talent, I shout out that I will definitely pass the exam and become a great hunter, no matter what it takes. After that, the monster's head immediately flew off, but it had no intention of stopping. On the other platforms where there were monsters, his sword stroke felled each of them. Even now, if you can't get points for teamwork, you can still get points for individual work. He turned his head with a smile and asked the examiner if he was right. But at first, the two could not even say a word while standing there with their mouths open. Then the attention was turned to a loudspeaker warning that everyone in the exam room should immediately go to the nearest shelter, as a huge tsunami was detected near Dokdo Island and was rapidly approaching. I looked up and watched the sun break through the circles overhead. I thought that now I had to go up the mountain and check everything myself. The easiest way was to jump on the flying platform of Chong-chun and then higher up. He just kept shouting in the wake of what he was doing, and it was no joke. As soon as I managed to get to the surface, I turned my head sharply to the noise behind him. The concrete wall cracked and broke under the pressure from the huge wave that was there, leaving a hole in it. But the main wave was on the backside. It was impressive in its size, so if it goes like that, no one will be saved. The payment from Persephone came just in time, and she apologized for being a little late. But it was even very timely, he thought, searching the store and quickly finding the ability to break water for 200 Hades. It's not clear where Snowball came from. He brought his jacket, but it's not clear where Ju Soyuz has disappeared to. The wall under the pressure of the second wave quickly made it clear that this was not important at all. He shouted to Snowball to act, grabbed his sword, activated the divine powers, and with them a new ability. With just one blow, the entire force of the wave was neutralized, and the water calmly spread out to the sides. He was happy as a child about what he had done until the waves suddenly fell on him. After that, the loudspeaker again announced that all examinees should immediately go to the nearest shelter. There was an extremely high probability of a second tsunami wave. This information quickly brought him to his senses. Looking at the huge hole in the wall, I wondered if he would be able to stop the second wave. Suddenly, a message came with an urgent vacancy for a mercenary, Poseidon, to repair the dam that brings tsunamis to the surface world. After that, it became clear that the gods were to blame for everything. If the report was to be believed, everything should have stopped as soon as the dam was repaired. While he was changing clothes, he was tampering that all the supplies were stolen by the dwarves. Persephone ran away with the gods at the first opportunity and had only one problem. But there was nothing to be done. If he wanted to live in peace in this world, he had to accept the job. For a moment, I found myself in the underwater world in Poseidon's palace. When I was looking at the architecture, someone came up behind me and greeted me in a man's voice. Hephaestus caught him by the head and said that he knew they would meet again. He also noticed that the fox had grown since he gave him this gift, but Snowball was not happy to see the god. This upset him because he had done nothing wrong, and the fox still didn't like him. Damdok consoled him, saying that Snowball was just shy, but I was curious why he was so active with Ju Soyuz and aloof with Hephaestus, and asked him what he was doing here. God immediately smiled and said that this was a stupid question, because a good blacksmith was always at work if something needed to be repaired. They were just short-handed, so it was good that he came to explain everything before starting work. When we came, he showed us that there was a hole in the wall, and it was from this side that water enters the human world. For them, it was just a small hole in an inflatable pool, but for people, it is reflected in tsunami waves. And it was all because of that dark thing on top of them. The gate was a constant headache, and no matter how much we fought it, it always appeared. Damn Doc did not understand how it was, because he always thought that gates were created by the gods, but they are just like the entrance to a dungeon. Snowball, when he noticed, got very scared and did not understand what was happening to him. A space began to appear next to the gate. It was quite a dangerous thing. A strong vortex came down to them, and a stream of waves formed from it, and then there was a feeling that it was drawing in everything around. Damn Doc was holding on with all his might, cursing this divine world and shouting that he wanted to go on vacation. Nearby, Hephaestus shouted to him to find something to grab onto, because if he got into the gate, he would be finished. The snowball could not hold on to the shoulder. His legs slipped off, and he quickly headed into the vortex. At the same moment, Hephaestus activated his divine powers and began to gather energy around him. He raised his hand above him, creating a portal for the reports to appear. A huge hand appeared from the portal and repeated every movement of Hephaestus, thus trying to tame the gate. From such power, Damdoc recognized that the deities were on a completely different level. Suddenly, dark energy seeped out of the gate and monsters with sharp teeth popped out. When they appeared, we realized that these gates also let in various monsters, even in the world of the gods. So that he would not stand unarmed, Hephaestus formed a portal in front of him from which a sword appeared. I shouted to repel the monsters while I continued to try to block the gate. When he took the sword, he thought that at least this time he would be able to build a wall in peace. But as always, he was very lucky. Bursting into the fray, he shouted that he wanted a minimum raise for such work. He hit one monster with great speed, and it didn't even have time to see who did it. But the body managed to instinctively jump to the side thanks to its intuition. I was so surprised that this could not have happened, since he had cut it using divine power. But he didn't care, and as soon as he opened his mouth, the monster called him a scoundrel from Olympus, and that he would tear everyone to pieces. Damdoc did not expect this fish to talk, and suspected that something was definitely wrong with him. He also knew that usually when the monsters came out of the gate, their attacks were weaker, and it could be very dangerous for him. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to the strange tramp of many approaching feet. A large number of similar monsters appeared behind me, but they were calm and measured. As soon as they got close enough, they attacked people like them. It was a spectacle to behold, and they fought each other even though they were identical. From the sign that those who had just arrived wore, one could guess that they were Poseidon's subordinates. At first, I was even afraid to fight them myself, because they looked strong as hell. While I was thinking about how lucky one of the fish got behind my back and was a second away from attacking, the sword went straight through the monster, reducing its sudden attack to 0. And in this case, one-on-one, these repetitions were not such a serious problem. During a series of blows, I noticed that the monster went into defense, so I realized why it was not destroyed by the first blow. Even when I added divine power to my skills, all I could do was scratch it. When the beat stopped, the fish raised its arms above it and showed its hands, shouting that it was finished. Such stupidity opened up weaknesses and allowed us to strike at weak points. And to check something else, he activated the wave splitter and struck the body with his sword. All those who were next in line for the battle were blown to pieces, and no one was spared. When the first one was over, he looked up at his work, smiled, and called for the next one. The monsters saw what he had done to their comrades and roared that they would tear him to pieces. This made Damdoc laugh and shouted back to open his eyes and see his power. He rushed to meet them, but suddenly the system informed him that he did not have enough points for the breakwater talent. This nonsense happened at a very bad time. Everything was going very well, which is why it was so unlucky. The monster came very close, took a swing, and shouted goodbye. But from the side, I felt that he was being hit by some unexplained blows in a large number. The shooting started and they were forced to retreat, and Damdoc was shocked to see them there. Pointing the gun barrel at the fish, the Red Fist's assistant sent them back. At that time, the gnome boss himself tore out the grenade's pin and shouted, "Good fish, fried fish." The grenade exploded very effectively, and the boss apologized to the pansy for being a little late. The chief among the fish called them little rats and was angry at their appearance. He rushed into battle to destroy everyone with his own hands. The assistant was holding it in his sights, just waiting for the fish to come closer to make a sieve out of it. But he didn't see that he was holding a stone that hit him in the arm and pointed the gun to the side. So the main man managed to kick the dwarf so hard that he flew away. He landed right next to his brothers who thought he would win. To take revenge for his assistant, the red fist exploded into the top of the swinging hammer. I hit the monster with all my strength so that it was smeared on the ground. Dumb Doc opened his mouth as it turned out the dwarf's hammer was incredibly strong. And I remembered that when I fell into the river Styx, I intuitively used it. Then I opened the system to find the gnome hammer skill and saw that it didn't even need many points. While I was looking at the skill on my ass, the fish caught one of the dwarves. Holding his throat with one hand and swinging the other, he tried to kill him. Damn Doc shouted out to him, calling him a fish stick and moving all the way over to him to strike. However, the skill was cancelled because the requirements were not met. The skill could only be used with blunt weapons. The monster struck him with its right hand to throw him away and out of the way. Sitting on the floor, I didn't realize that my skill hadn't worked, and that's why Snowball was gone. But I caught myself looking at my fist because if you think about it, it looked like a blunt weapon, and the combat skill was SS level. At this time, the monster was striking the dwarf a large number of blows without stopping. There was no time to think about it. I had to save him, so I had to believe in myself. The blow was very powerful, so it sent a wave to the sides. But the fish still managed to catch him, and this put a smile on the monster's face. But that was just an ordinary blow, and now it was time to activate the gnome's hammer. Damn Doc's fist nailed the fish to the ground, and it had no chance to continue fighting. This trick upgraded the skill from level B to level A, which was very satisfying. And then suddenly, there was Snowball, who was in a hurry. He picked it up and examined it to see if it was intact and had no wound on it. Since everything was going well, I could now count on him, and he turned into an iron glove. The use of skills became even more effective by strengthening the hands with gloves. A series of many blows threw the fish into the rest of its comrades. While they were trying to figure out how this happened, Damn Doc was already near them and swung for the next blow. The fish that got in his way flew away so that stones and dirt scattered after the fall. This Hephaestus kept trying to hold the gate and felt a strange burst of energy warning everyone to prepare for the attack. Damn Doc ran to him and asked what happened, and he shouted that he could no longer hold the gate. In an instant, a whirlwind broke out from there, hitting the ground hard enough to realize that if it was not stopped, it would suck them all in. Suddenly I saw something up there, but I couldn't do anything at that moment. The whirlwind lifted Hephaestus, who fainted due to loss of strength, into the gates. Suddenly, the system warned that an overly strong aura was detected and warned of danger. The creature that appeared said that he, a miserable insect, had done a good job with his subordinates. The subordinates shouted to the Master Poseidon to stop the whirlpool, and Damn Doc shouted at them to wait a minute because he had a question. With such a terrifying aura, they were sure it was the god Poseidon because it was very strange. The fish noticed that he was right. They looked great, but they also had a terrible feeling. The pattern on his forehead is the same shape as the one on the gate. No matter what anyone said, the feeling inside screamed that the creature in front of him was dangerous. When he raised the trident, he felt that something very dangerous was approaching. The energy at the end of the trident produced hundreds of rays that spread out in different directions. When they hit someone, they instantly destroyed the dum-dum with Snowball, barely managing to avoid them. The creature grabbed itself by the face. A wide, crazy grin appeared on its face, followed by laughter. My intuition was sounding the alarm, telling me that I would not be able to defeat such a strong monster. When I saw that after the attack there was one more person alive, I was happy because there was someone to destroy. A strong stream of energy erupted from the trident, and I barely managed to jump aside. The only thought that came to mind was that he would not survive now. To try to save myself, I took advantage of the wind speed and ran as fast as I could. But the creature appeared in front of him as if it had moved and asked where he was going. Gathering the energy at the tip of the trident, he advised the Olympian not to say goodbye to life. There was an explosion that illuminated the entire area, and the sound of the explosion and its force spread around. When I opened my eyes, I could not believe that I was alive, despite such an attack. He saw that Poseidon appeared in front of him and repelled the blow, so he called the creature Neptune and called it a fake. Neptune was angry and shouted at him not to speak like that because he was also a deity. Not wanting to listen to him, he punched him in the face and ordered him to shut up because he did not want to listen to him. Even the name Neptune was stolen from him, and he asked if he even understood it because he dared to talk about him like that. To avoid the next blow, he managed to grab Poseidon by the braids and pull him back. Damn Doc froze, looking at them as if he were seeing the battle of the gods for the first time. But the things they said to each other and pulled at each other's hair reminded me of small children fighting. Poseidon shouted that he was a fake and that no matter what happened, he would wipe him off the face of the earth today. Neptune laughed and asked if this was his 78th attempt to defeat him. He was expecting these words too and smiled, saying that this was why he had hired a cool god today. Something started to happen in the portal, which was a signal that it was time to see for himself. Damn Doc looked up there and wondered what kind of god Poseidon himself had hired, how strong he was. Hephaestus's head appeared from the gate, and he managed to get out. Although he was very exhausted and wounded, he said that everyone inside was destroyed. Looking at him, I wondered if he would have the strength to defeat Neptune, but he smiled and said that he had great hope for them. A beautiful girl jumped out of the portal with 2 other companions. She came down and looked at them all with a very calm look, and Damn Doc couldn't believe his eyes that it was Ju So-young. She stretched her hand out in front of her, opened her fist, and the remains of the cannonball fell out. Neptune shouted out to his gatekeepers how they could do this, and whether they hadn't already killed his subordinates. Enraged as hell, he swung his hand and gathered the energy to strike. Damn Doc knew what kind of equipment it was, and shouted at the top of his lungs to be careful, and he put both hands together and directed a stream of powerful force in her direction. She watched calmly as the flow of Neptune's power rushed toward her, but she just turned her head to the side and continued to watch calmly. Since the first attack was his, they decided that the second attack would be hers. Her dagger passed through the creature's body, leaving only a glow behind. But after the attack, she landed with her back to Neptune, so she didn't see his hand coming toward her. Damn Doc, who saw this, could not just watch and rush to help. And thanks to the improved intuition, the body moved on its own. Since Neptune was fed up with him, he wanted to kill him first and then the rest. Ju So-young grabbed him by the collar and threw him back to save him from the trident. At that moment, one of her comrades came up and got close to the god. His fist hit him, but did not knock him down, only pushed him a few meters away, exactly to the place where the little mage was hovering in the air, waiting for the right opportunity to attack. After the tapping with the staff, a powerful explosion with a strong wave thundered. Ju So-young asked him why he was getting into a fight so thoughtlessly. He looked at her and grunted because it was not even possible to help her. To this, she replied coldly that this could not be called help. Though I mentally called her smug, my tongue did not turn to tell her so because she was right. All she noticed from his movements and praised was that his speed had increased significantly. She also said that Neptune is very dangerous now because it is not stable. At that moment, Dame Doc was more concerned with who she was, and I saw a lot of questions on her face. She threw a jar and said that all questions and conversations would be after the battle. There was not enough information in the system about this, only perhaps it increased the divine power. Ju So-young asked me to have a drink without any questions and to memorize something. She believed that among all those present, he was the one destined to finish off Neptune. After these words, she immediately took off running toward the enemy. His head was spinning from her words, and it seemed like she was going to drive him crazy. She jumped up in front of Neptune and swung her dagger. Her speed was amazing. The number of cuts left after her attacks could be counted in dozens. While she managed to divert attention, one of her comrades launched a frontal attack. His strong punch nailed the opponent to the ground so hard that he couldn't even move. The magician came down to him and put a staff to his head to win the victory in one go. Because they were too careless, Neptune managed to quickly recover and scatter them to the sides. His punches were as powerful as a giant's, so after the magician, he immediately rushed at him and neutralized him. Damn Doc was still thinking about how Ju So-young wanted him to destroy him as they themselves were being scattered in two. Just yesterday I was a nobody, and even though I was a deity now, I didn't believe that anything would work out. Neptune looked at him again, because again he dared to touch his precious body. He bared his teeth and was determined to get to the bottom of it, because with each miss, he wanted to tear it apart even more. Damn Doc stood there, not even trying to dodge, watching the energy rush at him. Ju So-young jumped out and pulled her hand forward in an attempt to save the fool. When I pushed him away, I asked if he would continue to stand there helplessly, or if he would finally do something. She herself was thrown aside by the wave, and her arms and legs were torn. Neptune approached her, turned her over on her stomach, and stood with his foot on top of her, pressing her to the floor. I told her that she had done a very stupid thing, because she could have lived a long, happy life if she had just run away from here. Damn Doc barely managed to say in a trembling voice why she had done it for him. Neptune also asked why she had to save him, and the answer was quite obvious, namely that the guy in front of them was much stronger than him. In the end, he was destined to die at the hands of the very lower god he underestimated. His face showed a lack of understanding of her words, how he could defeat such a monster. She told Damn Doc that she believes in him and knows he will succeed. Her words went straight to his heart, and the system reported that the target's intentions were extremely positive. Until that moment, everyone called him a mediocrity, saying that his future was destined from the moment he was born. People born with talents lived among them, but their world was completely different. There was only one person who believed in him, his mother, who told him that talent was not the most important thing. Because of this, I wanted to make a lot of efforts not to be in the shadow of those who were lucky from birth, and then the day came when my uncle's unbearable debt fell on me. Then my mother would say that she was sorry that he had no talent, and that it was all because of her, but those words were only so that she could ease the weight of her failure. But then I wasn't completely angry or upset about everything I could think of at the time. Thank God it was even better that way. Now he could just give up, because when no one believes in you, there is no one to disappoint. Now everything was different. Those who believed in him had a chance, so this time he would not run away. After drinking what was in the jar, it gave blessings throughout the body, and the divine power increased rapidly. Being overwhelmed by the power, his speed also increased rapidly, so the first thing he had to do was to save Ju So-young. He carried her away from him and carefully put her on the ground, as he saw that she was wounded. As soon as Neptune was above him, he ordered Snowball to turn into a sword. The sharp end was in front of the god's eye, and he noticed it instantly. Due to the fact that I drank that substance and my body was full of energy, I had a chance. Neptune also noticed this, but told him that just because he was a little stronger, he shouldn't be so overconfident. He agreed with what he said, but there was still a very big difference between them. But even if that was the case, there was no way back. I tried to put maximum force into each stroke and accelerate myself with each stroke. We couldn't even give him time to breathe so that he wouldn't be able to think about a counterattack. But he was still a deity. In an instant, his hand slipped out and caught on my jacket. Neptune pulled him close, opened his mouth, and an energy layer began to grow between them. You couldn't get under his attack by quickly coming up with a quick idea to put your foot on his stomach. I pushed back at the exact moment he released the balloon, so I was lucky to avoid being injured. Neptune roared and shouted that he could now definitely consider himself a non-living being. This time, there was nowhere to go, but just in time, Snowball appeared and made a sound that he was on his ass. Damn Doc yelled at him to turn into a shield, and all the energy from the blow dissipated on the shield. Neptune opened his hand in such a way as to call the trident to him because he knew that the battle would continue with weapons. Pointing the trident in his direction, I asked him if he really thought or hoped to change anything. Poseidon, who saw the water dragon summoned in time, had nowhere to go from this attack. The underwater world has not heard such a powerful blow from his attack in a long time. Poseidon looked in that direction and exhaled, as no one could survive after such a thing. As soon as the dust settled, Neptune, who was heavily wounded, was still standing. And since he realized that he could not win with such help, he shouted that now everyone would die here together. Damn Doc, who was above his head, shouted that he would not allow it and put all his divine power into the breakwater ability. Benevolence is not an excuse, even for a fool, and this is clear. Looking back on my life for the first time, I realized a painful truth, that he could not trample on all her expectations. The next thing that happened was a message from the system that the forgotten god Neptune was defeated. The unknown gods rejoiced in his victory. The conditions for progress were fulfilled. Thanks to the last blow, he absorbed the power of the forgotten god, Neptune, and the Moonfox became the first level. The only words he said before he collapsed, exhausted, and lost consciousness were that he had done it. When I first started to come to my senses, my mind was still completely blurry, and when I opened my eyes a little, I saw a man's physique in front of me. When he realized that Poseidon was in front of him, his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He told him that while he was sleeping, he had restored his clothes and healed his wounds. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for defeating Neptune, but I wanted to ask one question. Because he defeated Neptune, most of his powers returned to him, but part of the strength was lost when he struck the last blow, and that strength is enough to establish order in the world, but it is also enough for a sea of chaos. So the crux of the matter was what he was going to do with that enormous power. The system warned of the danger that bloodlust was detected. The target's intentions were evil, and Poseidon's talent for ocean-depth eyes saw right through him. Dumb Doc thought that he was testing him so that the lie wouldn't work on him, and that he was reeking of bloodlust. I realized that if he considered his answer unsatisfactory, he would most likely kill him on the spot. So he began to say that he had defeated Neptune not for the sake of his power, but with his permission, he wanted to move on to become a god who would be recognized by others. Poseidon looked at him and assessed that he had the feeling that he was looking at himself from the outside. He looked so innocent, as if he was looking at a newly born god. He stood up and began to say that he saw that he was telling the truth, that the annoying gate had been destroyed, and that he had met a new god. Therefore, there was no reason not to organize a celebration, and ordered his subordinates to prepare an incredible holiday. When everything was ready, Damdok came there too, and when he saw Ju So-young, he went to her. He asked me to go away to talk to her, as he had a lot to ask her. The snowball immediately jumped into her arms, interrupting such a tense moment. He ignored requests to come back only after he raised his level and began to behave like a nobody. And then suddenly a bunch of fans came running in, shouting out Ju So-young and asking what she was doing here. I tried to shout and open them, but all my efforts were in vain. Suddenly, he felt a heavy hand on his shoulder and a familiar voice on his back, saying that he had found someone. Poseidon grabbed him and dragged him away, wanting to talk to him a little longer before he left, but Damdok shouted that he refused. But he just laughed and said he liked his straightforwardness and asked if he wanted to work under him. After Ju So-young looked at them, she thought that they had met too early, but she hoped that they would succeed together in this life. When I returned to the island where I took the exams, the examiner congratulated me on my good work and told me that the exams were over. He was very much looking forward to getting his official hunting license, not to mention that he managed to get 6 stars on the first try. Hunters everywhere are divided by stars. The rank system goes from no rank to 9 stars. In Korea, there were only 13 hunters, above 5 stars. Jong-chun couldn't keep his emotions in check as to how they had given such a criminal a license. His screams were like music to the ears. These miserable screams could not be pleasing, and he uttered words that could make your ears go numb. I noticed that Snowball seemed a little heavier, and if you think about it, he grew. He thought that maybe when he grew up, he would become completely independent, and he also really liked Ju-sul. When he leaned against her cheek, unable to believe that such a cute animal could do such a thing, he asked if he liked her better. Suddenly, Ju So-young spoke to him and said that she could see that he was in a good mood, but it was not for long. She asked him to follow her, and as promised, she would answer his questions and tell him everything. What he needs to know and what is about to happen will concern the world and Ragnarok. As they drove down the road, Damdok told her that it was no wonder he felt that she had a strange vibe about her. He asked her who she was and asked if he was really interested. A year ago, by some miracle, a window with vacancies for part-time jobs for the gods appeared in front of her, and using the rewards from her part-time job, she was able to become strong. And then she became a medium-level god, and that's when she discovered a talent called foresight. She didn't know everything, but she learned about the incredible future that awaited the whole world. It referred to the fact that there would be a battle between the gods, and it would happen in the near future. Sometimes the names of gods in different myths differ, for example, Zeus, Jupiter, Poseidon, Neptune, Eros, Cupid. Usually people don't think about what they say, they think they are the same gods. But these were different gods with different names, unlike the gods who survived, thanks to the devotion of people. There were still forgotten gods, who came to reclaim their names through the gates with which their power grew. The gates play the role of repositories that the ancient gods use to grow their strength after they release all the energy they have spent in battle. With those gods who are at rest, and in the end, the 6th Ragnarok will come. To help people fight, dungeons were created in their likeness, similar to gates for training people. But he remembered how Thor said that people must suffer there because it could have been a training ground, and many people do not return from there. I shouted out with emotion how she could say that, because during this time, lost in building them, we could have done it ourselves. But she did not let me finish. She said that he had seen Neptune himself, and should understand that he came out before he had time to gather all his strength, but he was very strong. That is why the gate was a place before which even the gods cowered and did not take risks. The more the forgotten gods collect energy, the more complex the gates will be. Even for gods, protecting their world is a big task. If this happens and Ragnarok comes, it will be very bad for the human world. Because there will be no god left who will be able to protect the world of people, of course, people will not know about it. Considering the appearance of the gate as a mere coincidence, like a car accident, if a Neptune like this appeared in the city, everything would be destroyed. Damdok thought now he had everything going for him. The appearance of the land talents, skills, abilities of the gods, as in the game items, dropped out after defeating the monsters. It was the last gift to humanity. He punched himself in the leg and shouted that he knew they needed to survive on their own and how they could stop it. Ju So-young said that he was the one who would help in the future she saw. He had closed many gates and protected the world. So she did everything in her power to help him while they were talking and arrived at the scene. Dumdok said that he was so impressed that he didn't notice how they got there so quickly. I thanked her for giving me that substance and for helping me in the underwater world. But he was caught off guard when he saw a sign in front of him that read in big letters, Yu Dam Dok, a new hunter with 6 stars. Even the journalists who were hanging around saw him and started asking questions. Ignoring the journalists, he asked Ju So-yul if they were in the right place, because it seemed like they were in the wrong place. But she only hit the gas pedal sharply, leaving him face to face with the press. A month later, Yu Dam Dok became a 6-star hunter who managed to complete 3 dungeons for places, and the last one, even without losses. He also went through more than all the dungeons and accumulated items worth millions of dollars. Not everything was so good when you became popular, but it was necessary to increase divine power. Reporters were constantly picking on him because he was a 6-star hunter and all that. He also remembered and told Snizhka that he had his own fan club and was gaining popularity even without doing anything. Then their attention was drawn to the front door, where Ju So-young came to see them. She told him that he needs to work harder, and then fame will quickly become his strength. The battles that are still to come will be much more difficult than the expected end, and people will fall into depression without believing in the future. The coming future may be much crueler than she imagined, but is he ready to accept such a cruel fate? Dumdok thought it would be better not to know about the end of the world and thought it would definitely not come, but now that he knows, he was not going to sit around waiting for a miracle. Ju So-young said that she knew he would answer that way, and now it was time for a divine part-time job. They were greeted by a deity from whom radiance emanated and called little birds. The deity smiled and said that they could be glad that they had come to work for Apollo himself. Dumdok opened his mouth because he saw the sun shining very brightly and very close behind him. Apollo told him that of course it was very bright because it was created in his likeness. And even the sun carriage is beautiful because it was created in his likeness and has the same smooth curves as his body. So the beautiful one asked them if they had ever heard of him and how he was perfect since he was born and only getting better and better. When they were alone, Damdok asked her how he didn't get tired of bragging about it, but it was good that they went to work on time. Ju So-young herself could hardly stand to talk to him and even thought about hitting him once. But he smiled and looked at her and said, "Isn't this a cool part-time job, on the contrary? Because at first it was building a dungeon, then training a dog. But now it's wonderful to do something divine, because it's not every day that you get a chance to fly through the sky with the sun at your back." Ju So-young thought about it and asked him if he thought it was the real sun they were pulling. I explained that he shouldn't think so, that the sun on the back of them was just a fake made by Apollo, and they were flying across the sky to adjust to the rising of the real sun. Then he was outraged, but wondered why he had to come up with such a trick if there was a real sun. And at that moment, they were just passing in front of the village. People were raising their heads in delight and looking up. In this way, people could believe and be devoted to the sun god, so he increases his divine power, and so Apollo became the sun god. Damdok listened even more indignantly and asked if this was a scam, and she said that it was. He was just a fraud who fed on people's faith. She told him not to worry about anything and to focus on his work, as the pay was decent. But still, I wanted to finish this vile part-time job as soon as possible and go home. After a while, Damdok noticed that she was very good at driving the carriage. She exhaled and said that of course, since she couldn't even remember how many times she had worked. She could drive, even with her eyes closed. This prompted the question that it was not the first time she had worked part-time for Apollo. But then it was not clear why the sun god did not recognize her when they came to him. Ju So-young saw that it was impossible to lie, and why he suspected something now. She got out of it by saying that such a god certainly doesn't remember anyone but himself, even if you come to him several times. In an instant, their carriage was surrounded by creatures that roared and looked like wolves. The intuition skill was activated, and in order to prevent the wolf from harming the horse, my hand pulled the leash aside. Ju So-young was puzzled, as the appearance of sun wolves was strange because they were not usually seen on this path. Dum Doc noticed that they looked a lot like hellhounds, so he activated the skill that tamed Cerberus to check it out. She wanted to be the first to deal with them, asked him to hold the line, but he said he would deal with it himself. But she shouted that they were superior to him, and if he touched them only, he would be burned to the bone. But he wasn't going to sit there. He turned Snowball into a sword, saying that if he was to become as strong as the prophecy, he should be able to fight them. After these words, he leaned on the roof of the carriage with a burning desire to deal with them. Standing on the carriage, he waited for at least one of the sun wolves to attack him as he had planned. I shouted at her to watch what she was doing and grabbed the sword. I took a swing right before the creatures approached him and hit them with a snarl. He crouched down to one of the wolves, put his hand on its head and smiled. But the smile quickly disappeared, and smoke could be seen under his arm, and the heat was burning through his entire arm. The system reported that the power of Neptune had been activated, and the blessing of the waves covered his entire body. After this skill, touching creatures became easy, and the number of dogs that listened to him was 33. The work was going like clockwork, and the only thing left to do was to tame one sunny wolf. Ju So-young could not believe her eyes when she saw him and the wolf hugging each other. She smiled and exhaled, thinking that he was truly a fool. When I first met him, he was very weak and could do nothing at all. But no matter how painful or difficult it was for him, he still pushed forward, which might seem meaningless to others. He changed his life 2 or 3 times, 100 times, and little by little he always rushed forward. To achieve such success in 1,869 lives is an incredible result. Therefore, I am sure that the only one who can destroy it is he and she who is reborn for this purpose. After finishing with the first group of sun wolves, Yu Dam Dok ordered them to help drive away the rest. When the rest of the wolves approached, they took their positions, and he ordered them to attack. When they attacked them, it was clear that they managed to confuse them because they were identical. He shouted to them that they shouldn't even worry, and that he would reconcile them all soon enough. Falling on top of him, he smiled and tamed another one into submission. One by one, they obeyed, so that 40 dogs were following him. Since they were very good at subjugation, he asked them not to relax in order to conquer the rest. The system threw another message that the number of dogs exceeded 40 and an additional skill to Dog Lord was improved. The additional skill was called Howling, and now he had the ability to call tame dogs, and they would follow all his commands. There will be no use in taming all the dangerous hounds in this situation. I thought that if he called his little friend, the fight would be very spectacular. Ju So-young shouted at him to hurry up and tame the others. She added that sun wolves are not so dangerous when they are alone, but they can join together. That's what happened, and the rest of them joined up, and now, in addition to their size, they have long-range ability. Because the fireball hit the sun, a large, bright explosion formed in the sky. The carriage was destroyed and fell with stones to the bottom of the sun, and the sun disappeared into the air as if it had not existed. Ju So-young rushed in just in time and grabbed him by the collar from above, scolding him that at the most crucial moments, he was somewhere in the air. I also shouted at him to get ready as soon as possible, as there was no time, but he was interested in where the carriage with the sun was. But they fell down right on the village. I looked down and saw what was happening there. And there was something else she didn't tell him, but that would come later, because the village was in great danger. So at first, the first task was to save the people who were attacked by the wolf. One girl tried to run away, but at one point she turned around and saw a column coming at her. She fell to her knees and covered her head, and in an instant, the column split and fell to the side. Dam Doc stood in front of her and told her that everything would be fine, but asked her to get out of here as soon as possible. He ran to the creature to fight it, so that it would stop destroying the area and threatening people. The great sun wolf was a monster that was too strong and impressive in its power. The force of his paw still squeezed, so he had to run away sharply to the side and also thought about what if the sun wolves all joined together. They still can't win against the strongest dog in the mythology of hellish Cerberus. As soon as he appeared, he instantly pounced on the wolf, knocking it to the ground and catching it by the neck. Dum Dum told him to hold him as hard as he could to finish his job. People watching from the outside didn't understand what this guy was doing when he suddenly fell from the sky and dealt with the threat in a flash. Next to the man was Ju So-young, who quietly told the old man that he was Yu Dam Dok, the deity who saved them, and the village from the threat of destruction is now their protector. When everyone was seated, he was happy to see the dogs eating and playing and hoped that he would not have to clean up after them. And those who were responsible for all this were on their backsides. He drew attention to them and shouted at them not to cool off and continue working. I thought that there was no way to even turn away because they were starting to play the fool and do nothing. Then a man came up and addressed him as the god of swords, Yudam Dok, and asked to hear him out. He fell to his knees and said that even though they were late, he wanted to convey their gratitude on behalf of the entire village. At first, he tried to explain that everything that happened was his fault and asked me to stand up. But he answered that no, thanks to the gods who watch over them, they are still alive, and their village is very grateful to him. And now they will make sacrifices every month for his favor. As soon as he started shouting "Long live the god of swords, Yudam Dok," he disappeared in a second. When he escaped, he thought about what it was about, but what Ju So-young wanted to say was that all the locals were crazy. And they also did a good job of smashing the carriage to pieces. The sun wolves ate the sun. With a Sunday left in Apollo's part-time job, Ju So-young approached and said they could try to create it again. At first, he thought she was joking with him, and they looked at each other in silence. A good old friend of his could help them in this matter. Throwing their arms back, they walked along the place that led to the most famous blacksmith, Hephaestus. He asked her what it meant that she was making good money if she offered to create the sun. But she calmly replied that she did not have a penny in her pocket. This provoked a violent reaction because no matter how close they were to Hephaestus, he would not create the sun for their beautiful eyes. She asked him to stop talking and just follow her in silence. He was overwhelmed with anger that she thought she was not so sure that they would get help for thanking her, and she agreed to a bet that if she won, she would make him a wish. Hephaestus smiled and replied that he could easily, since he owed her a lifetime of debt, so it was nothing to him. He said that if they gave him 3 days, he would even make 2 suns for them. Damdok wondered what she had done to him that he agreed to make a sun for free. When they got out, Dumdok asked her what she wanted to talk about after the battle. Ju So-young also asked if it was right that he should fulfill her wish. But before that, she needed to tell him something, and he agreed, saying that he was listening carefully. In order for him to stop the battle of the gods and with it the end of the world, he had to acquire priests. What she said made him nervous, and he asked what she meant by the word priest. When the divine power of a lower-level god passes 50,000, the god's call is unlocked, and he can enlist the support of the priests. Damdok asked if she was joking, because you can't just grab a priest and say he's a god and need his support. Quite calmly, she said that he would have to do it anyway, because he would not be able to stop Ragnarok on his own. He needs to gather 12 priests from the prophecy who are in different dimensions, and only with them will he be able to save the world. He asked her to stop because there was too much information, and he was confused, and also asked to omit the fact that 12 priests were needed. Not 1 or 2, but what did it mean that they were in different dimensions? Now he could only moonlight on the continents, but as he gradually grew in power, he would be able to moonlight on all dimensions. But there was nothing to worry about because the first priest lives in their world and will become a combat-ready assistant in the future. And now she wanted to get back to the task at hand because she had come up with something. As soon as Hephaestus was done with his work, they started working again. The people worshipping the sun noticed something, and one man asked who Yudamdok was. The second man said that this is the god who saved the second village from monsters, and Apollo appreciates him for putting a banner with him on it. He was not happy about this desire. Of course, he wanted to show off his divine power, but he thought it was a shame. Ju So-young reminded him that he had agreed to the wish himself, and its purpose was to unlock the power of God's call. And so, I had to do everything I could to make sure that more people knew about it, or to make it useful. After finishing the task, he was sitting in the store, choosing a new talent, and he liked the talent for shooting. In some cases, this will help improve long-range combat, as it was difficult to deal with Neptune because I could only use the breakwater. And now, after purchasing it, I wanted to see how much its divine power had risen. It was a shame to carry the banner every day. He couldn't even sleep properly. And then he saw that he had reached the necessary strength, and the call of God was unlocked. I couldn't believe my eyes, yet the damn banner worked and the power increased so quickly. Then Apollo suddenly came up and asked him what he was looking at, and he was startled by this sudden appearance. The sun god calmed him down and extended his hand, as the mother system is invisible to others. I'll give Doc a smile. He's not talking about the system window. It's clear how the gods call it. Then Apollo asked if anything special happened during the part-time job. He said that they were attacked by sun wolves while working, but they managed to overcome them. If I understood correctly, he was talking about those capricious wolves and thanked them for their good work. That's why, in addition to my salary, I wanted to give a small bonus as a sign of gratitude. Apollo pointed his hand, and it emitted a golden glow, and after a few seconds, the system reported that the self-healing ability was available. He raised his hand, looked at it, and asked God if it was true that he had given him this ability. Laughing loudly, Apollo put his hand to his head and replied that of course, such an ability could only be obtained from him off the job. People are even lining up to learn this skill after hearing that Damn Doc asked Snowball for help with something. I asked him to turn into a knife to cut his finger and test his new ability. The system immediately informed me that self-healing had been activated, and it was slow but quite effective. Snizhok looked at his injured finger with a very guilty look as if it was his fault, and Dumb Doc hurried to calm him down. Apollo noticed such a beast and bent down to examine it, since a creature that turns into a weapon is extremely rare, and asked if he could tame it. Damn Doc looked up, thought for a while, and answered that he had tamed some animals, and asked why he was interested in this. Apollo exhaled heavily and said that lately he has been worried about some people because he does not know how to get along with them. Rubbing a hand under his beard, he added that he was also tired because they were constantly eating his son. As soon as Apollo thought that it would be a good idea to try to tame them, the room brightly lit up. When I saw the sun wolf in front of me, I opened my mouth because a lower-level god managed to do what no other god had done. Apollo was sweating, sweat trickling down his cheeks, and asked in an uncertain voice how he had done it. Damn Doc agreed to help him with his problem, but he had only one condition. He had to teach him how to shoot a bow. For most people, Apollo is the god of the sun, but he is also the god of medicine, the art of the muses, and the god of archery. When the training began, Apollo put an arrow in his hands and explained that to create an arrow, you need to concentrate spiritual power in your fingertips. Next, I had to hold my breath, pull the bowstring, and take good aim. When the sun god shot the arrow, the wind blew at them from its speed, and it ruffled their hair. Apollo closed his eyes and smiled, saying that in general, that was all he needed to know. Damn Doc analyzed the lesson and realized that the movements of God were indeed quite primitive. Then the training began, and surprisingly, Apollo was a rather strict teacher, and a month had passed since he began training in the world of the gods. During this month, Damn Doc managed to master the skill of archery, which he was very pleased with. When I put on the jacket, I thought that before that I had only studied from YouTube videos or copied the movements of my opponents. But learning the techniques of the gods themselves is a completely different matter. And if you combine your talents with the teachings of the gods, you can reach a new level. Suddenly, Ju So-young came up behind me and told me that they had to go back. There is not much time left before the meeting with the first priest. Damn Doc agreed, but asked where Apollo was now, as he wanted to say goodbye to him before he went to say goodbye. Ju So-young replied that the sun god was playing with the sun wolves like crazy. Dumb Doc was happy, and as it turned out, he had worked in a dog store there for a reason and learned that every dog can be trained with food. And if I hadn't told Apollo about this method, it could have turned out badly, but everything turned out well, so there's nothing to worry about. As soon as they started walking, Ju So-young asked him to think before he did anything, because it could end badly for him. Damn Doc stopped and turned to her and asked her not to worry, as he had managed to improve his divine powers and had gained new abilities and learned new techniques. Meanwhile, in the gloomy underworld, the moon illuminated the dark forests and the river Styx. A servant came to Hades and bowed before him, telling him that he had checked several times that Cerberus had been summoned without permission a few days ago. Hades looked down and said that it was quite brave for someone to dare to touch Cerberus. His anger made his energy shine, and he made a promise to himself that whoever it was would get him out of the ground, because the fool who did it had to find out what the price was for daring to insult his god of the underworld. Sometime later, in the human world, the sun's rays brightly illuminated the Sangoon Guild House. Dok trained tirelessly, and his sword skills grew a little bit. During the break, I turned to Ju So-young, who was looking at something on her phone, and asked if it was true that a priest was coming here. Without looking at him, she continued to look at something and asked him to be patient and wait. But Dok noticed that it had been a Sunday since he had been here alone with the sword, so his strength was increasing more slowly than during the work. I asked her if it wouldn't be better to go for a part-time job, but she didn't even listen to him and didn't care because she had found what she needed. Ju So-young turned around and went to the exit and asked me to wait here until she returned from her part-time job. Dok shouted in the wake that he was going with her in that case, but she turned her head and angrily ordered him to wait here, period. Of course, he didn't like the fact that she was leaving him like that and was going alone. Stomping his feet, he still could not stop being angry because he could no longer sit still waiting for the priest to show up, so he would also go to work. But his shouting was interrupted by a person who said in a sneering voice that he needed part-time work because he was poor. Dok calmed down and thought that only one person had such a nasty voice. Zhongchun laughed, not because he was tired of pretending to be a hunter, but because he decided to work for a living. But he believed that he made the right decision because talentless people should work at talentless jobs. Dok interrupted him, asking if he wasn't tired of it yet, and why he came to the Sangung Guild if he wasn't from the other guild. Then the thought slipped through my mind that this one could be his priest, and I prayed to all the gods that it was not. Zhongchun replied, "Doesn't he know that there's a training tournament here today? And with a sponge like this shabby cat, you won't get far with it." Sneejok looked at him with anger in his eyes after these words. Then he showed what kind of dog he had, boasting that it had hound blood from the German lands, so only because of this can he be considered the winner. Clapping him on the shoulder, he sent him to a part-time job so as not to interfere with them, as he had an important day today. Dok gave him a look, and he thought about this training tournament. At the tournament itself, after Zhongchun's performance, the judge announced that he had 39 points, which is a record for the entire duration of the competition. This result made him very happy. A smile appeared on his face, and his eyes moved to the podium. He looked at his father as he always did to show him how beautiful his son was. His father was the president of the #1 guild in Korea, Iris Jonggunak, and after the victory, he was definitely going to appoint him as his heir. The host's voice resounded throughout the room as he announced the last participant of the most popular boy in Korea. Participant number 10, Dok, with his incredible beast. The jury couldn't believe their eyes, for they had never seen such a breed in so many years, and they thought it was a flaming hound. Zhongchun looked at them, his mind going through nothing but why this fool was here and what was happening. Dok came up to him, clapped him on the shoulder, and agreed that he had a great dog. Therefore, no matter how loudly he declares himself, he will definitely not succeed with such a cute animal. After these words, Zhongchun's nerves lost their hold, and he took Dok by the collar and pulled him toward him, shouting why he was sticking sticks in his ears. Suddenly, Jonggunak came up from the side and shouted at him to stop behaving like that, and if he was going to participate, he should do it calmly. Zhongchun turned to his father and tried to say something, but he threatened him to shut up until he sent him abroad again. Then Jonggunak approached Dok and said that his son had no manners, so he apologized on his behalf. Dok bowed his head and asked that it was not necessary and that he was not offended by anything. The man noticed that since their last meeting, which was a long time ago, he had grown a lot. He also asked me not to waste my nerves on his son, and just remember that his son is a fool. After the tournament, Zhongchun was furious because his father was back to his old ways and was only doing what he did to compare him to all kinds of garbage. He grabbed his head and screamed that since Dok came into his life had gone to hell. Because of his anger, he didn't even notice that there was a guy in the room who was playing the game and asked him why he was so irritated. Zhongchun calmed down, turned his gaze to him, and grumbled about why he had just come. The guy continued to play without taking his eyes off the game, saying that he was gambling because today was the last day of the event. This answer made it clear to Zhongchun that he could do whatever he wanted because he knew that his father would take care of him and that he and Dok were a pair of shoes. It was at that moment that I came up with the idea that we could put them both face to face. It was already getting dark outside, and Ju So-young returned to the Sang Guild from her part-time job. Dok told her what had happened and wished she could see the look on Zhongchun's face as if he had lost everything. Recalling his expression, I laughed as it was one of the most beautiful sights. Ju So-young listened to him in silence the whole time and did not react in any way until at one point she turned her eyes to the side and said that he had come. Dame Doc didn't understand her at first until the system warned her that her intuition was in danger and a voice sounded behind her. Pulling out his sword, the boy warned that he had crossed the road to Zhongchun in vain and would now be in big trouble for it. He asked them not to be very angry, and in an instant, the sword struck where they were standing, followed by an explosion. He said that it was nothing personal, as this guy was an elite hunter of the Iris Peck Kurim Guild. Zhongchun, meanwhile, sat waiting, thinking that Baek Kurim was one of his father's favorites. He also knew that he was born with a talent for swordplay at SS level and was an amazing genius, developing his abilities to master level at the age of 10. But because of his ruthless nature, he beat his opponents almost to his last breath, which is why he was nicknamed the White Demon. Meanwhile, Damdok managed to block Baek Kurim's shot in time to react. Then he pushed the sword in front of him and smiled because he saw that the enemy was puzzled. I looked up at him from under his hair and asked if this was what he called a surprise attack. At one point, the guy in front of him swung his sword, but the blow hit the concrete, leaving behind pieces of stone as Baek Kurim managed to bounce back. When I was wiping the cut, I was even surprised by this skill because I had planned to finish everything quickly. And now he was not going to retreat. He bent down and took a fighting position for the next attack. The swing of his sword passed by his head very quickly, only a few centimeters away. Seeing that he had missed, he jumped up over Damdok and swung his sword. But the blow was so powerful that a shockwave was formed around us. However, he didn't manage to hit him properly and only left a cut on his cheek. Before Baek Kurim could recover from that, he was in front of him again and managed to ask which hand to leave him with first. Even then, Damdok realized that this was his priest, so it would be very difficult to fulfill even the first condition. Ju So-young said that the first condition was to inspire reverent fear in the enemy. She said that there are many ways, but the easiest way is to show a significant advantage in strength. While he was thinking about those words, Baek Kurim's punch hit his right arm, leaving him wounded. At that moment, it seemed impossible to inspire fear and show more strength because the enemy was better at swordplay than he was. I had to think of something to do quickly because I saw that Baek Kurim had already rushed to attack again. However, he managed to put up a block, the force of which sent him flying in the other direction, but the enemy followed. Then it became obvious that one sword would not do the trick. Why should they have fought only with swords, ordered Snowball to turn into fighting gauntlets to stop the enemy's blow? The bewildered Baek Kurim did not even expect to receive such a powerful blow to his face after blocking the attack. The gnome's hammering created a pile of dust and a shockwave, but despite his strength, he was still standing on his feet, holding his sword. He even said that a swordsman who uses his fists looks like a coward. Damdok smiled and advised that there are things in life that cannot be achieved with a sword alone. But Baek Kurim shouted at him to shut up, and he missed the shot only because he was not paying attention. At his words, Damdok laughed, because if it was true, he would definitely not let his guard down now, and the battle could continue. As evening fell, darkness descended on the city. The lights were on in the houses, and Damdok was already home. He and Ju So-young were waiting for Baek Kurim because after the battle he left him a note with his home address. The only question was whether he would come because he beat him well during the fight. Ju Sobel reassured him that she was sure he would come, despite the fact that he had been abused by him. Because of all this, I fell headfirst onto the couch because it seemed that this job was even more tiring than a part-time job. You also need to fulfill 3 conditions to gain the support of the priests, the first of which is to earn the respect of the priest. The second condition is that the priest must make a clear decision to become its patron. And finally, the third and last condition is that the priest must take an oath. Because of all these conditions, my head was spinning because the procedure was quite complicated, so I asked Ju So-young curiously, could she have priests, since she was a middle-level god and should have been able to use the call of the god long ago? She looked out the window and quietly replied that due to the circumstances, she was unable to use the call of God. Damdok asked her why, but she just turned and looked away in silence. And only then she said that it would take a long time to tell, and at that time, they came to the door of the apartment. Damdok switched over and heard that a guest had probably arrived after all. I shouted at Baek Kurim not to stand there like a bullshitter, and if he came, let him come in. Staying on the other side of the door, he shouted at me to shut my mouth and wanted to ask me whether he was a swordsman or a fighter. Damn Doc said that the point was that he could be a fighter as well as a swordsman. The door was opened with a foot, and then they shouted that it was all a lie. There could not be a genius who was good in two fields. So he asks him again which of the two he is good at, fencing or martial arts. In order not to argue for a long time, I smiled at him and offered him that if he didn't believe him, they could hold the fight again. Pek Kurim immediately stalled because he didn't want to fight, but there was a second reason why he came. He wanted to find out and analyze the reasons why he lost the fight. Damn Doc asked with a more serious tone in his voice if he really wanted to know. But suddenly he closed his eyes and smiled and said he would not tell. I did not really want to reveal the secret of my weaknesses to such a rude man as him. And if you really want to know, Yu's older brother Damn Doc should have said, "Please take me as your student." Pek Kurim turned around and shouted that he would rather bite his own tongue off, so he was leaving. He was so angry at the conditions of calling him an older brother. It took 10 years for even the fool Changchun to at least pay attention to him. Damn Doc said in his wake that it was a pity that he was leaving, but he was so eager to teach him one of his martial arts techniques. He himself thought that the reason for his defeat was his ego and realized that Pek was also aware of this. I also realized that the martial arts style combined with fencing was very effective, but I just needed to push it more. Pek Kurim was shaking, trying to somehow pronounce those words for the condition. Dame Doc was teasing him on the ass that he couldn't hear what the jerk was muttering under his breath. That's why Pek Kurim decided to close his eyes and say it, and when he masters martial arts, he will beat up Yu Dam Doc. He gathered his strength and shouted to his older brother Yu Dam Doc to take him as a disciple. After that, I felt like I was being put on the spot and given the go-ahead if he wanted to. But before he could start training, he had to fulfill one more request. When the dust and heat settled, Pek Kurim performed the priestly rite and fulfilled the first condition to become a disciple. And when it came to being faithful to God until the end of his days, I was worried at first, but he reacted very calmly, comparing it to a game. After completing the ceremonial oath to become a priest the next day, they went to the training hall and studied all day. Damn Doc said that he was done for the day and praised him for his success, so much so that he fell to the floor. I noticed that he is doing well, and his learning abilities are much better than expected. From what I saw, I could tell that he had learned a lesson from that one blow, and at this rate, he would soon learn to hit the dwarf hammer. But he did not tell him this, but turned around and ordered him to combine everything that had been studied so far and draw conclusions for the day. He wiped the sweat from his face and muttered that the teacher was too strict. After I repeated everything, the system window showed that the priest had assigned the skill to the combination of 1-2, and due to this, his combat power also increases. It even made me take a second look at the priestly system. It was not stupid, even though at first it looked like hard labor. After the training was over and evening came, Pek Kurim shouted why he was not going to the dungeons he had mined with his own labor. Covering his ear from Damn Doc's scream, he muttered that he had explained everything to him that time and didn't need to do it again. But he also remembered the Ragnarok offensive and agreed that stopping it was a good thing. And that's why he didn't want to miss the chance to go to the dungeon and didn't understand why he was going to the gate that gave him nothing. Damn Doc exhaled heavily, remembering how Ju So-young felt and hadn't told him all the details yet, so it was a perfectly normal reaction. I decided to talk to him as an adult, so I asked him to listen as they headed for the gate to understand when the end would come, and also to find other guardians in other worlds. And Pek Kurim sat down on the floor and said that if they don't go to the dungeon, he's not going anywhere. At this point, Ju So-young's nerves gave out and he grabbed him, shouting that he was unbearable and that they would go to the gate without further ado. They were interrupted by Ju So-young, who came over and quietly watched them, and then told Damn Doc that there was another way. After playing the game for a little while, Pek Kurim wondered for a moment if everything was going well with them, and if the students still needed to follow the teacher. But a sharp anger overcame him, and he threw the game on the floor because he didn't have to worry about them because he had paid a lot of money for the dungeon. Because I was so angry and violent, I didn't even see that a strange glowing pattern appeared over my head. There was a bright flash in the room that was even visible outside. Dumb Doc could not believe his eyes that he could really be summoned whenever he wanted. Pek Kurim was speechless for a while, only hearing the two of them talking about something. When he came to, he asked what it was, and Damn Doc hastened to reassure him that it was nothing special. He just used his powers to summon him. So I told him to calm down and deal with the monster on his backside first. It took Pek Kurim just a couple of seconds for his sword to cut the monster into several pieces. Praising him for his speed, he waved his hand to follow him, but he continued to stand his ground, not moving.